Arc 10, Parasite, Part 1. Creepy crawlies riddled the building's interior, and I hadn't even used my powers to bring them here. No power meant the building was dark. The city, and consequently the building, were flooded, which meant it was moist. With exceptions for some of the luckier areas, pretty much every service was suspended, which meant no mail and no trash pickup. Trash bags were accumulating anywhere that people lived, here included, and when they had run out of trash bags, people had started littering, throwing their trash out the windows, or leaving it in hallways instead. To top it off, the weather was getting warmer. For bugs, all of these converging details made the city into a paradise. I walked in the lead of the group, with Imp a step behind me and to my right. The two of us held flashlights, but Imp was barely paying attention to hers. She held a knife much like mine, and she dragged the point against the wall as we walked down the hallway, carving a groove into the paint. Her flashlight spent more time pointed at her feet than in front of us, leaving me the burden of lighting our way. I stopped, turned the flashlight on an open apartment door. Here, maybe? Gru grunted, adjusted the position of the unconscious body he had draped over one shoulder. Scout it. Bitch nodded, letting Angelica off the chain, pointing at the door. Of the 4 dogs she had with her, only Angelica was still under the influence of her power, standing 3 times her usual size. Despite the invigorating effects of Bitch's attentions, the dog moved slowly as she loped into the apartment. It was painful to look at her. She was moving as though she were 10 years older than she was. The other dogs pulled at their chains, wanting to follow. Bitch made angry clucking noises, then ordered them to sit. They were slow to obey, but I think something about the look in Bitch's eyes told them they'd better listen. One of them reared back as I sent more bugs into the interior to investigate. Bitch had been short-tempered lately. The loss of 2 of the dogs she was closest to, it played a large part in that. She'd lost 8 dogs in total, and Angelica had only lived because she had been too hurt to be brought along. Problem was, Angelica wasn't recovering from those injuries, and from what I gathered, she might not ever recover completely. Bitch was forced to rely on a single crippled, obedient dog and 3 dogs that were in the peak of health, but impatient and untrained. Of course, I couldn't deny that a big part of her attitude was me and the fact that I was here. Angelica returned to the doorway, looked up at her owner, and then returned to the apartment. No problems, Bitch spoke, translating Angelica's body language for everyone present. Gru looked at me, and I nodded confirmation. I led the way inside, using my flashlight to scan the area. The apartment had been ransacked, but it wasn't the kind of ransacking that suggested the looters had gotten to it. No, it was the very thorough removal of everything valuable that could be carried away by a family of 3 or 4. There were 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a kitchen with room for a small table and accompanying chairs. There was a smaller bed in one room and a king-sized bed in the other. Dresser drawers, cabinets, and bedside tables were all open, clothes strewn around the rooms. The occupants had left in a hurry, and I was guessing they probably hadn't expected to come back or find much of their stuff here when they did. Tattletale grunted as she dropped one box beside the couch, where it landed on something with a crunch. Cities trying to restore order one area at a time, maybe doing more harm than good. This building's been declared uninhabitable, which isn't exactly doing anyone any favors, because most places in the city are just as bad or worse, and a lot of people don't have anywhere else to go. Anyways, they're kicking everyone out, trying to clean up as best they can, get rid of that trash, do what they can about the infestation of rats and bugs. Might still be a few people around, but I doubt anyone's going to be poking around enough to find us before 11 or so tomorrow morning. Then we have time to do what we need to do, Gru spoke. He used one foot to drag one of the dining room chairs out from beneath the table, placing it in the center of the kitchen. I hurried to his side to hold the seat in place as he hefted the limp body from over his shoulder and set it down. Shadowstalker nearly tipped over, but together we caught her and leaned her back. Her head lolled. Regent put down a second, smaller box to the one Tattletale had brought. I switched positions with Tattletale. She began searching Shadowstalker, removing crossbows, cartridges of ammunition, and 2 small knives. She found a phone with a touchscreen, then reached beneath the unconscious girl's hood to pluck a wireless earbud from the girl's ear. After rubbing it on Shadowstalker's cloak to clean it, she put it in her own ear and started fiddling with the smartphone. After a few seconds, she pronounced, "GPS hasn't been activated. They probably won't turn it on to look for her until she fails to return from patrol." "Can you stop them from activating it?" Gru asked. "Or maybe we could have Skitter's bugs or a dog carry that piece somewhere else?" Tattletale shook her head. "I can turn it off. Give me a minute." Regent and I had already started hauling extension cords out of the box Regent had been carrying, untangling them and feeding them over to Gru. He began winding a cord around our captive, starting with loops around her wrists and arms, going up her arms to her chest, then back down to bind her body to the chair. We handed him the next cord, and he did much the same thing with Shadowstalker's legs. As he worked the bindings up her extremities, he kept his index and middle fingers on her, wrapping the cord over top of them. When he was done with the loops at one spot, he moved his hand up further, then repeated the process. "Copping a feel, Gru?" Imp mocked as she let herself half spin and collapse lengthwise on the couch, making sure it isn't tight enough to cut off her circulation. "Ah, you an expert on that stuff? I didn't take you for a bondage freak," she stretched. He sighed. "Just get the generator." "I just lay down. So stand up and then get the generator," he ordered. She made a show of slowly standing and, with exaggerated motions, dragging herself over to the box Tattletale had brought. She retrieved a black plastic portable generator that wasn't much bigger than a microwave oven. She acted like it was 10 times heavier than it was as she hauled it over toward the spot where Sophia sat. Gru, for his part, ignored her. Once the wires were in place, he used duct tape to secure them. Then he got 2 more chairs, laid them on their sides, and taped them to her chair. He was almost done when Imp finally concluded her charade with the portable generator. The LEDs at the ends of the extension cords lit up as we plugged each cord into the generator, glowing a dim orange. Gru stood, then pushed the refrigerator away from the wall so he could unplug it and plug the appliance into the generator. I couldn't be sure if it was to ensure a steady current through the wire or because he wanted a working fridge. I'd finished unpacking the wires, so I picked up the empty box and entered the living room to put one box inside the other to minimize the mess. Bitch had claimed the sofa for herself, reclining with 2 dogs up beside her. She was rubbing her forearms, which were probably strained from controlling the more unruly dogs with the chains. She glared up at me, and there was something ugly in her expression. I couldn't blame her for being angry. Her dogs, some of her closest friends in the world, had died because she had been saving me, only for her to find out shortly afterward that I had been a traitor. Maybe saving me hadn't been her primary motivation, but it seemed she'd used the past week and an unhealthy dose of simmering anger to revise her perception of things, so I was to blame for what had happened. It wasn't getting better, either. She seemed to get angrier with every hour spent in my company, and I was worried I'd have to face the brunt of it very soon. "She's awake," Tattletale called out. I hurried to the kitchen, leaving Bitch where she was. Our captive hadn't budged an inch. "She's sitting there, pretending to sleep in the hopes that we'll say something." "It would be clever, might even work if I wasn't here," Tattletale said, with a bit of a wry tone. Shadowstalker's head rose and swiveled as she surveyed the full extent of her bindings. Then she glanced at us. After a long pause, she spoke. "Electrical cords. Strongly advise you to avoid using your power to pass through them," Tattletale answered. "And in case you're thinking of dropping straight down through the floor, don't. We've got extra lying under the chair." The heroine leaned hard to one side, looked down. You'll be a little groggy." Tattletale grabbed the last remaining chair from beside the kitchen table to sit down opposite the vigilante heroine. "The fight took a lot out of you, and we tased you, and I took the liberty of sticking you with one of your own tranquilizer bolts." "You don't hold back," Shadowstalker commented, seemingly unfazed by her circumstances. She tested the strength of her bonds, experimentally. "Says the person who tried to slit my teammate's throat," Regent spoke. Shadow Stalker looked at me, the eyes behind her mask moving to my throat. Tough costume. She doesn't even deny it. I can't believe I've gone to high school with this lunatic. I resisted the urge to respond, shrugged instead. Too easy to get into an argument, too easy to let something slip and reveal who I was. Well, you fuckers got me. She cocked her head to one side. What's next? We all turned to look at Regent. Regent, in turn, gave Shadow Stalker a serious look. He ran his fingers through his dark hair. Tattletale stood from the chair, and Regent sat, putting himself 4 feet away from the heroine. His mask was a plain white, a half smile perpetually frozen on the smooth, unadorned face. Her eyes went wide behind the eye holes of her mask, and she pulled hard against her bonds. No! Fuck! Have you seen his files? You don't know. We have an idea, Tattletale interrupted. Fuck you! Shadow Stalker shouted. Guys, do me a favor? Regent asked, not taking his eyes off Shadow Stalker. He smacked his scepter into the palm of one hand. Gag her? Then give us some privacy? You sure? Gru asked as Tattletale moved over to Sophia's side, bent down to get some excess cord, and lifted up her mask just enough to wind the cord into her mouth. The duct tape made a tearing noise as she freed a length from the roll. I could still make out the swearing on Shadow Stalker's part as she tugged at her bonds and rocked her seat. The setup Gru had created by duct taping the other 2 chairs to her helped ensure she couldn't throw herself to the ground and maybe break the chair in the process. I'm cool. Regent shifted the position of his stool a half-foot to his left so he could lean back against the corner of the refrigerator. He brought one of his feet up onto the seat of the stool and rested his chin on his knee. Just as long as you're sure, Gru spoke. How long? Regent glanced at Gru, then looked to Shadow Stalker. Depends on her. Could be 15 minutes, could be 3 hours. Shadow Stalker grunted, long and loud. Gru began ushering us out of the room, and we obeyed, except for Imp, who seemed to need a little bit of an extra nudge. Gru blocked her view of Regent and our captive with his body and put a hand on her shoulder to push her toward the door. Following, I cast a backward look over my shoulder, saw Shadow Stalker's arm twitch. She winced, mumbled a swear word around her gag. Gru shut the kitchen door behind us, and for a moment, all was dark, quiet, and still. Bitch and her dogs were all lying together on and around the couch, Bitch's hand on Angelica's head, where the dog lay just below her. Only Angelica's eye was open. Bitch and the other 3 dogs had their eyes closed. Angelica's excess flesh had been shed and deposited on the floor as she shrunk down to her natural size. It looked like Bitch had kicked most of it one corner of the living room. Blood and other fluids streaked the carpet between the base of the couch and the corner. Can we watch TV? Imp asked Gru. We could get one of the extension cords in. No. Or plug in one of the lamps so we can. No, he repeated. We're here for another few hours. We do nothing that could draw attention. That includes having lights, flickering or otherwise, shining through the window of an apartment that's supposed to have no power. What the fuck am I supposed to do? Sleep, he glanced at Bitch, who was trying to do just that, while the rest of us stand watch, or go looking for a candle or flashlight and read somewhere the light won't show through a window. Fuck reading. We could find a movie and watch. No movies. I just told you why we can't turn on the TV. Why would a movie be any better? We could cover one of the windows. I want everyone keeping an ear out for trouble. You agreed to follow my orders, didn't you? No TV, no lights. They glared at one another. Imp's chin defiantly raised so she could meet Gru's eyes, the dark sockets of his skull-faced helmet. One of the people who lived here was a teenager, a little younger than you, Imp, Tattletale cut in. Go find the bedroom, see if there's anything interesting. Anything left behind will probably get stolen before the family gets back, so you could keep some stuff for yourself if you find anything good. Yes! Imp spun on her heel and strode off to the other end of the apartment. Bitch opened her eyes and furrowed her brow in irritation at Imp's outcry, or maybe at the recent argument, but she just shut her eyes and made a deliberate attempt at returning to sleep. Gru waited until Imp disappeared from sight before groaning. It's tiring, dealing with her. All of us irritated each other when we first joined the team. Give it time. We'll find a rhythm. Tattletale reassured him. Gru turned his head my way, but he didn't say anything. I wondered if he had been about to say I was the exception, then changed his mind. Instead, he spoke, "I'm going to lie down for a bit in the master bedroom. Tattletale, Skitter, you keep an eye on things. Wake me when you need a relief." "Sure thing, boss," Tattletale answered him. I couldn't bring myself to reply, and stayed quiet instead. As Gru was leaving, Shadow Stalker screamed from the kitchen, a strangled, muffled noise. Gru paused, waited a moment, and then continued in the direction Imp had gone, opening and closing the door at the end of the short hallway. I hugged my arms against my body. Glancing toward the balcony showed that none of the windows were broken or open. It wasn't because I was cold. "You okay with this?" Tattletale asked. "All in," was all I could say. She smiled a little, almost apologetic. "All in. We were doing this to Sophia," I told myself. The same girl who had abused, insulted, and tormented me almost every school day since I'd started high school. She'd punched, kicked, and shoved me, had ruined my belongings, insulted me, thrown food at me, humiliated me, and had goaded others into doing much the same things. She was the one who had pushed me to that do-or-die point where my powers manifested. If that wasn't enough, she had tried to kill me less than an hour ago, not because I was a criminal that deserved the death penalty, but because I had seen her unmasked. I was inconvenient, and with all that in mind, I couldn't be sure that she deserved this. Tattletale got her MP3 player and put an earbud in the ear that didn't have Sophia's device in it. The other earbud dangled from the cord, faint music playing from it. Grabbing a blanket from the arm of the couch, she curled up in one of the armchairs. I took her cue, pushing one chair across the carpet, so it was by the sliding glass door leading to the balcony. I didn't settle in right away. First, I exercised my power. There were definitely enough bugs in the building for me to use. I found the spiders in the building and set them to preparing webs, stringing strands across every doorway, hallway, and stairwell for every floor in the building. I directed buzzing houseflies and mosquitoes into every apartment, including the one we were in, and placed at least one bug on every person I found still inside the building. A trio of unwashed men in the basement, among the storage area where residents kept the stuff they couldn't have in their apartments, a pair of teenagers that lay on the roof, holding hands, an older man near the top floor, alone, and one family of 5 on the second floor. After a moment's consideration, I set spiders to stringing webs around the balconies as well. When capes were in the cards, I couldn't afford to ignore the possibility of grappling hooks, rappelling, teleportation, or flight. The spiders would sense any movement of the webs, and I could sense what the spiders did, in turn. I found a book on a shelf that looked readable, then sat down sideways in the chair, so my back was against one armrest, and my legs hung over the other, the kitchen door in front of me, the balcony behind. There were no lights in the apartment or out on the street, but the heavy clouds weren't blocking the moonlight for the time being, which afforded me the opportunity to read, looking up after every page or two to double-check that things were quiet and still. It might have been peaceful, if not for Shadow Stalker's occasional grunt or scream from the direction of the kitchen. On occasion, she went into her shadow state for a fraction of a second, then reverted back before the wires passed through her. Regent hadn't called out, so I assumed all was well. Bitch's bulldog Bentley was lying on the couch with his head nestled in Bitch's armpit. I was on chapter 3 of my book when he began snoring, surprising me with how steady and loud the noise was. Sirius, the lab I'd met on a prior occasion, lay between Bitch's legs, his head lying across her belt buckle. A setter was curled up at the base of the sofa with Angelica. I couldn't remember its name. Bitch looked so peaceful here. It was strange seeing her relax and rest so easily when, day to day, even before recent events, she seemed to be on edge to a degree that would drive most people to insanity. It wasn't aggression or anxiety, exactly, but some combination of the two. Tattletale was playing some game on her MP3 player, I saw. The mosquitoes I'd placed discreetly on Brian's back told me he was turning over constantly. He was as restless and agitated in relaxation as Bitch was when awake. Imp, I could sense, was taking apart the teenager's room, finding CDs and DVDs and holding them up by the window, maybe to see them in the light, as I was with my book. I hadn't known her to rest in the 3 days I'd known her. I could almost believe she was one of the capes that didn't need to sleep, but the theory would have felt a lot more tidy if I could connect it better to one of her powers. I turned my attention back to my book, looked up again when I heard a bang from the kitchen, a grunt, and a scream. The bugs I'd placed on Regent didn't show anything amiss, but I couldn't really get anything from the contact with Shadow Stalker. She was violently flickering in and out of her shadow state now, and the slow speed with which she was returning to normal seemed to suggest she was fighting the urge to use her power. Regent was standing, but he hadn't called for help, so I started to read again. When I'd read the same page 4 more times and realized I hadn't actually taken in any information, I dog-eared the page and closed my book. I focused on each person in the building in turn, followed by a double-checking of the spider webs, the others here in the apartment. I stopped short. Regent was sitting, unmoving, and in the last 10 seconds or so, Shadow Stalker had disappeared from the chair. "Fuck!" I shouted, standing. "How?" Bitch climbed up off the couch, and Tattletale stood, looking to me, eyes wide. When I realized why her eyes were wide, I let the bugs flow from beneath the panels of my costume. I knew in an instant that Shadow Stalker was behind me. Deftly, she grasped my wrist, knocked me to the ground, and then pointed her crossbow straight at my eye, the arrowhead clinking against the lens of my mask, which definitely wasn't bulletproof or arrowproof. For several long seconds, we remained there, unmoving. Brian and Imp appeared in my peripheral vision, but they stopped when they saw Shadow Stalker. Shadow Stalker started laughing, then stood, holstering her crossbow. I felt Regent stand in the other room. When the kitchen door opened, he was laughing as well, the exact same cadence as Shadow Stalker. He ran his fingers through his hair, and Shadow Stalker moved one hand as if to do the same thing, but the hood she wore stopped her. She stepped away, and her movement seemed uncannily out of character. Maybe a bit of a slouch, a bit of swagger that hadn't been there before. Her eyes met mine. "Totally got you, dork," she chuckled. Arc 10, Parasite, Part 2. 3 days ago, I drew in a deep breath, then exhaled, long and slow. "I got your back," Lisa told me. I nodded. With a push, the door swung wide open. The inside of the building didn't match the exterior. It was situated in one of the low-lying areas of the docks, where the flooding had yet to fully dissipate. The buildings around here were in such bad shape that nobody was willing to use them for shelter or venture inside to take things. On the inside, however, the place was reinforced with girders and beams. Pieces of sheet metal sat between the thick metal shafts and the exterior wall, with holes cut to accommodate the windows. Handles on the metal shutters suggested that the plywood could be moved aside in a pinch. At ground level, there were stacked sandbags of a slightly different make from the usual, with plastic stapled over each pile. The place hadn't yet been organized. A pair of beds sat in one corner, surrounded by assorted pieces of furniture. The building's interior was dry, crisp, and brightly lit. It might have appeared sterile, if not for the spray paint on much of the sheet metal and the tracks of dried mud on the ground near the door. Our arrival was met by the furious barking of a half-dozen dogs. A set of gates ringing the front door stopped them from attacking us. Brian was sitting on the far end of the room, beside Aisha. He wore his regular sparring uniform, and Aisha wore much the same thing, though she was wearing shorts instead of yoga pants. His little sister? Here? Alec was sitting cross-legged on a pile of furniture, a bowl of colorful cereal balanced on one knee. A long cut ran from just beneath his ear to his shoulder, beneath his shirt. He was watching a TV that was plugged into an extension cord that hung from the ceiling. He'd turned my way at the barking of the dogs, and I almost missed him uttering the words, "You gotta be kidding." One of the dogs apparently recognized me because it stopped at the gate and wagged its tail. A part of me took that as a good sign. Then Bitch appeared, immediately wheeling on me, water flying from her damp hair. She'd probably just come from the shower. She wore loose-fitting army pants and a black tank top that had darker spots where beads of water had soaked into it. A towel hung around her shoulders. As she saw me, emotion hardened the lines of her face. Her hands clenched as she strode toward me. I saw the aggression in her body language, squeezed my eyes shut, and tried to relax. I remembered what Brian had said during our sparring about how tensing up would only make you more vulnerable. If that was true, I was really glad I hadn't tensed up. She was sturdily built, and she didn't hold back in the slightest. She kicked down the dog gate, and an instant later, her fist connected with my cheekbone to send me sprawling to the ground, my tailbone absorbing most of the impact. I'd been knocked around by Lung, Glory Girl, Bakuda, and even Leviathan. Some of those guys hit magnitudes harder than Bitch did, but it still hurt like hell. It spoke volumes that while Lisa stepped forward so she could defend me, Gru and Alec didn't. The dogs tentatively passed through the open gate, but hung back in deference to their master. I broke off mid-sentence. Opening my mouth to speak had caused the pain in the right side of my face to come to bear full force. I deserved that. Bitch delivered a swift kick to my shoulder, making me grunt and fall flat onto my back. Deserve that too. Point made, Lisa told her. Stop. Fuck you, Bitch snarled. She pointed at Brian. It's irritating enough that he wants to start giving orders and calling himself our leader. I'm not putting up with it from you two. I do what I want, and what I want is to beat her face in. Bitch turned, strode to the pile of furniture, and then lifted one of the loose shelves that had been removed from the bookcase. It was a piece of wood chipboard about 3 feet long and a foot deep. Lisa moved to put herself between Bitch and me and stave off Bitch's attack. She turned to Brian. Hey, a little help here? Brian frowned. Why did you bring her here? To talk, Lisa said. When Bitch tried to move around to her left, Lisa shifted her position to stay in her way. I sat up, used my legs and hands to put some distance between Bitch and I. She was going to fuck us over, Bitch shouted. I shook my head, but Bitch and Lisa's movements left me unsure if Brian had seen. I called out, no, I wasn't. Brian stepped forward and put a hand on Bitch's arm. She scowled but lowered her improvised weapon. He leveled a serious look at me. Lisa said you were, and when it comes down to the two of you, I'm going to choose her. What Armsmaster said made too much sense, and a few of the little things about you suddenly made a lot of sense. No, I mean, I was going to betray you. I'm going to fucking kick her teeth in, Bitch shouted. Past tense. I raised my voice. I changed my mind. Bitch made a deeper noise, low in her throat. Isha and Alec approached, which contributed to the loose half-circle of people and animals around Lisa and me. Tension hung heavy in the air. You changed your mind. Brian didn't sound as though he believed me. Dealing with Armsmaster? Realizing what an asshole he was? It was kind of a wake-up call. I'd already begun to think of you guys as my friends, and what we were doing, it wasn't so bad. Most of our fights were against Lung's gang. Barring Lisa and Aisha, every set of eyes on me was glaring. I climbed to my feet, flinched a little as Bitch shifted position, fearing another attack. My cheek was radiating pain like someone was driving a nail into it. My shoulder didn't hurt half as much, but it wasn't exactly fun either. I changed my mind after we raided the fundraiser and talked to Coyle. I went home, and when I started thinking about sending that email to the Protectorate, I realized I couldn't. It would have meant explaining things to my dad and leaving you guys. I couldn't do either. That wasn't all that long ago, and it sounds pretty thin to me. I raised my arms in a bit of a helpless gesture, then let them flop back to my sides. It's the truth. I'm not good at this, at talking to people or convincing them. All I can do is tell you how things were from my perspective and hope you'll see I'm sincere. He folded his arms. Is that all you came to say? I drew in a deep breath, then sighed. And I'd like to be back on the team if you'll have me, please. His eyebrows rose. I seem to recall you leaving in a huff after our last conversation with Coyle. What's changed? You have to understand, I was angry at myself as much, more than I was angry at you guys, for letting that thing with the little girl happen, for not connecting the dots. But I've thought about it, talked to Lisa, and I'm open to talking about it if you're willing. And why should we believe you in all this? He challenged me. I can vouch, Lisa started to speak. Taylor can answer for herself, Brian cut her off. I floundered for an answer. I got the distinct impression that they wouldn't be satisfied if I couldn't provide one. A knot of ugly emotions gathered in my stomach, building as I felt the condemnation of these people I'd been so close to not so long ago. Realizing that much gave me an idea. It wasn't much, though. I turned to Brian. You remember when we were on the way to your apartment, what happened? Which? That thing with the bully. Or after that, the, awkward conversation. Hey, dork, Alec cut in. He's not the only one you have to convince. You can't omit details and leave us in the dark here. Yeah, Aisha added. Brian gave her an annoyed look. I looked at him, then looked down at the ground, feeling heat spread across my face. The flush in my cheeks made the side of my face throb. I hated feeling humiliated, felt way too many ugly emotions rising in a long-conditioned response, a spark of anger at the forefront of them. Stiffly, I replied, I let Brian know I was interested in him, romantically. It was the truth. Ah, Alec responded. I knew it, totally knew it from the second I saw you at his apartment. Aisha cackled. I stole a glance at Brian and saw his expression hadn't changed in the least. When he spoke, he did it with a small shake of his head. You could have been doing that to get me to let my guard down. Bullshit, Alec retorted. What? Brian turned toward Alec. I said bullshit. Alec repeated himself. Taylor said it herself. She sucks ass when it comes to lying and being smooth. She lied well enough when she was keeping her undercover act a secret. I didn't lie exactly, I said, quiet. I just didn't tell you. Nobody answered that statement. I felt dumb for saying it, however true it may or may not have been. Alec added to his earlier comment, I don't ever pay attention to that team drama shit, and I picked up on the fact that she liked you. It was so obvious it was irritating. It was strange. Alec was standing up for me. He was insulting me while he did it, but he was still backing me up. That could have been an act, Brian stressed. And even if it wasn't, it doesn't mean anything in the end. You don't really believe that, Lisa replied. You're pissed at us. I don't blame you. I'd be pissed at us too. But you're only calling her a liar because it's a hell of a lot easier to be angry at her if you think the person you befriended was a fake. Brian sighed, loudly. Don't turn your power on me. Who says I am? Chancing a look at Bitch, I saw she was pacing back and forth, each set of paces short and restless. She didn't seem to have calmed down any. I wasn't feeling much better myself. I said as much, all I want is for things to go back to the way they were. It's not that easy, Brian replied. When I met his eyes, he looked away, his brow furrowing. When had things been good? What point in time was I so eager to return to, where I hadn't been racked by guilt or nervousness? By the time I got over my fear of getting caught, I'd run away from home and cut ties with my dad. Then, before I could come to terms with that, I'd found out about Dinah, which had affected me more than anything else. I'd terrorized hostages, maimed a supervillain, hurt superheroes, but it was Dinah that left me lying awake at night, feeling helpless, feeling like I was the scum of the earth. And I couldn't help her from the outside. That, more than anything, was why I was here. I wasn't strong enough to fight Coil on my own. I couldn't go to the heroes and rely on them to handle it, not with Coil's power giving him 2 attempts to escape, 2 attempts to any counterattacks, 2 attempts to track down the person who'd informed on him and deal with her and take his pick of the outcomes he wanted. That wasn't even getting into the more complex uses of his abilities, only using one of his concurrent realities to try something, doing it over and over again until he got a result he wanted to keep. I couldn't beat him in any kind of confrontation. Lisa had convinced me. I would only solve this by getting in Coil's good graces, talking to him as someone he could respect and listen to. I couldn't do that without convincing these guys to let me back on the team. No. I answered Brian, you're right, it's not that easy, but if you'll have me, I'm willing to work my ass off to make it up to you. I'm pretty good as a member of this team, you know it. If you want to monitor my every move, fine. Any restrictions you want to put on me, fine. I'll even give up my pay from Coil and any jobs we do, whatever you want. He shook his head, then asked me, why? Why come back? Because I've been to the shelters. I've walked the streets and seen what the merchants and Chosen are doing out there. I want to resolve this thing with Dinah. Whether I like it or not, I know that the fastest way to get to that point where everything's okay again is working with Coil. Lisa spoke. I want her back on the team, obviously. If we're voting, that's where my vote is going. Mine too, Alex said. You're wound up, Brian. Maybe it's Taylor being gone. Maybe it's Aisha and your dad getting attacked. Maybe it's the general situation with the city, but it's getting miserable to be around you. Taylor was always the one who was on the same page as you. She'd be someone you can work with and talk to at least. You'll be happier in the long run if she's around, and we'll be happier if you're not so fucking crabby. Sides, if she's giving up her pay, then it doesn't even cost us anything. It costs us a lot, Brian said, his voice low. If mistrust and tension fucks up our team chemistry, especially if we start fucking up in the field because of it. So you're voting no? Lisa pressed him. Do I get a vote? Aisha cut in before he could respond. No, Brian and Lisa refused her in unison. Aisha made a face but didn't seem too bothered. I don't want her on the team, Bitch spoke. Brian shook his head. I don't know what to tell you, Rachel. Alex right for once. We need her. We need the firepower out there, at the very least. Looking at this objectively, I think I'd have to say we should keep her. Which is 3 votes for, 1 against, Regent noted. Bitch threw the piece of chipboard she was carrying into the wall, hard. One of the dogs started barking in response or in alarm. She spat in my general direction and then stalked over to the far end of the room, her dogs trailing after her. The metal stairs clanged with the impacts of her boots as she ascended to the next floor. Lisa hesitated, then followed after. Alec glanced at us, then put a hand on Aisha's shoulder and led her away, leaving Brian and me alone. Thank you, I said quietly to Brian. Brian shook his head. Don't thank me. Alec's right when he says that we'll probably get over this. Maybe we'll even become friends again and get to the point where we can talk about it. But that isn't going to happen today, and definitely not right here and now. Okay, I replied, but he was already walking away, leaving me standing alone at the entrance. I had told myself I would rise above the likes of Sophia and Armsmaster. I was all too aware of their flaws, and first and foremost among them was arrogance, pride, so I'd swallowed mine. Now, there were so many ways this could go wrong. Tattletale held a pair of binoculars and scanned the building in front of us. There's movement. We're good to go. Go, Gru ordered. Hitting the target wasn't so hard. My bugs flowed in through windows and Bitch took the entrances. Angelica had free rein, slow as she was, while the other dogs stayed on leash. Gru hung back with Tattletale, Regent, and me, while Imp moved forward, not charging in, but staying close. The tricky part would be balancing this. Too far one way or the other, and this got really ugly, really fast. Our targets were looters, and they were well armed, though bullets were getting to be in shorter and shorter supply. Coil had sources, and the Chosen did as well, but these guys were from the merchants. They were vagrants, addicts, and people who subsisted by mooching off the system. When the system had failed, they'd latched on to the only group that would take them. More had joined because it was safer and easier to be among the thugs, looters, scavengers, and thieves than it was to be among the victims. Safety in numbers. They weren't strong or trained, and I couldn't call them brave. That said, they were bolstered by a kind of desperation. I'd seen it before when I set my bugs on some of my enemies, how some panicked or saw the futility in fighting the swarm, and others just fought on heedless of the damage they were taking and the pain they were feeling. That same desperation posed an issue as far as our plan. If we gave them a chance, they wouldn't hesitate to hurt or kill us. They'd raided countless homes and businesses, taken everything of value they could uncover. Phone lines were down everywhere, police response times far slower with the roads in the condition they were. The looters had amassed a small fortune in stolen possessions, and intel said they were storing it here, as reasonable a target as any. My bugs drove the bulk of the looters out into the street. Between Gru's darkness and Bitch's dogs, those same looters were driven back and cornered, hemmed in by the snarling beasts. The second we had the situation under control, Shadowstalker dropped out of the sky, a crossbow in each hand. Tattletale and Gru were darted a second later. She reloaded in a second using the cartridges that had been set on her gloves, then darted Imp and me. By the time the dart embedded in the armor of my costume, Tattletale and Gru were slumping to the ground. The fabric of my costume blocked the dart, so I didn't go down. I drew my baton, snapped it out to its full length, and charged her. She backed away, loading and firing another series of bolts at Regent and the dog closest to her. By the time I reached her, she'd fired a second dart into the dog, then shot Bitch. My baton passed through her, of course. She walked through my arm, stepping right behind me, and then drove her knee into my side. I grunted and fell over, and she retrieved and slammed a dart into my shoulder before I could recover. Take it easy, Regent. Bitch managed to scream an order to her dogs before she passed out. Go! The three newer dogs hesitated, but Angelica didn't. She huffed out a snarl as she passed them, and the others took her lead and joined her in stampeding down the street until they disappeared from sight. I laid in the water, aware of how cold it was, trying to ignore how dirty it was. My lenses afforded me an advantage in that I could watch what was going on without my open eyes giving anything away. I saw Shadowstalker touch her ear, then murmur something. Tattletale had gone over everything Regent needed to know, as far as that particular routine and the orders to give. It took 3 minutes for the PRT to arrive. I saw the green and white flashing lights and heard the splashing before anyone stepped into my field of view. Holy shit, one of the PRT uniforms spoke. Restrain them and throw them in the van, Shadowstalker ordered him. Zhao, get the containment foam, one uniform spoke. The captain? They're tranquilized, Shadowstalker spoke, sounding disinterested. Don't waste resources. Protocol states we use containment foam, especially when there's an unknown. The girl with the horns? Mover 3 teleports through shadows, Shadowstalker lied. None of them can escape restraints on their own. But if Gru uses his power... Shadowstalker turned, then fired another dart into Gru. Satisfied? We drained the darts of the sedative, of course. Still, I was betting Gru would have words for Regent after this was over and done with. The uniform didn't back down. No, I want to know why you don't want them fully contained. Because I've been up since 5 in the morning. It's well past midnight now, and I'm going to have to start doing fucking paperwork the second we get these guys in a cell. I'm not allowed to walk away until they're in custody, so if I let you foam them, I'm going to have to wait another half an hour to an hour for the solvent to get mixed and brought to them, 5 or 10 minutes for it to work. Fuck that. They're down. Listen to the hero who just took down a whole fucking team and get them in the truck. There was no reply to that, but a moment later, someone picked me up and started carrying me. I maintained deep breaths, kept my body limp. A few bugs congregated on me and the uniforms moving us, and I didn't do anything to dismiss them. Maybe they would distract the uniform from the fact that any of us were still conscious. I was placed on the cool metal floor of the containment vehicle, my hands cuffed behind my back. A few seconds later, someone was thrown over top of my upper body. Too light to be Gru or Bitch. It would be Imp or Regent. The metal doors slammed shut and locked with an audible shift of internal machinery. So many ways this could go wrong. We had safeguards, of course, including but not being limited to Coyle's assistance. Still, there was something profoundly unsettling about allowing myself to be cuffed and imprisoned. No ears on us, Tattletale murmured. We're good so long as we keep our voices down. PRT is having words with the remaining witnesses who stuck around to grab loot after the dogs ran off, Regent informed us with a whisper. They're backing up the story we wanted to sell. We'd passed one hurdle, at least. The act could have gone either way. If we didn't sell it well enough, we could have wound up with the PRT arresting us for real. If we timed it wrong or if one of the looters decided to attack us while we were pretending to be tranquilized, something ugly might have happened. You hit me way too hard, I murmured. Muscle memory, Regent replied. Blame her, not me. You all right, Imp? Gru asked. Duh, she replied. It was a good few minutes before the truck bucked into motion. Out of unspoken agreement, we stayed quiet, just to be absolutely sure that the driver wouldn't hear us. It was maybe 10 or 15 minutes before we arrived. We're at their headquarters, Regent spoke, his voice hushed. Then we're in good shape, Gru answered. Weld and the wards are coming out to meet Shadowstalker. Heads up. The back door of the van opened. I could feel cooler air enter the enclosed space. There was an audible click of a gun, as if they were anticipating an attack the moment the doors opened. Wow, one of the boys commented. I was guessing it was Kid Win or Clock Blocker. How'd you pull that off? They were distracted. I picked them off. That little freak that saw me with my mask off was wearing armor, so I had to resort to CQC. Shadow Stalker made it sound matter of fact. Right, one of the other boys said, sarcastic. You're quiet, Weld, a girl's voice. Vista, who was Weld? Basking in how fucking awesome I am. Shadow Stalker gloated. Maybe later. For now, the accented male voice spoke, just satisfy my curiosity. You know the passwords we memorize each week, and you know why we memorize them, right? Yeah, Shadow Stalker replied. One of the other boys spoke. For any interaction with any flagged shifter or, the boy paused, master. Oh. So, Weld said, keeping in mind that Regent is the highest-rated master in the city, I'd like for you to give us this week's password. There was a pause. Comanche 662, Shadow Stalker spoke. Another pause. All right, Weld confirmed. Pick 'em up and haul them into the holding cells. It was all I could do to stay still and not show my relief. Tattletale had anticipated this much, had drilled Regent on it, but she had been wrong in the past. Imp was lifted from on top of me, and Tattletale was picked up next from right beside me. I was among the last to get lifted off the floor of the truck. Shadow Stalker held me until a pair of PRT uniforms could haul me to my feet and lift me by my armpits, my feet dragging on the ground, my head hanging. I chanced a partial opening of my eyes, knowing my lenses would hide them, to sneak a sidelong peek at this Weld. Metal skin, metal hair, and a strange, melted junkyard texture to his shoulders. I'd crossed paths with him before the Endbringer event. He spoke, his voice quiet enough that it was probably intended for just him and Sophia. Where are the dogs? Tranquilized them, they didn't go down. Ran when Hellhound dropped. Weld nodded. This is good work, but it doesn't excuse or make up for what happened earlier. Whatever, Shadow Stalker replied. No, this is serious. You assaulted a team member. I'm not about to let that slide. On one level, I wasn't surprised to hear that. I knew, cognitively, that she had that kind of personality. But emotionally, I hadn't really believed it. It caught me off guard to hear she was that big a problem in the wards as well. A few seconds passed before she finally asked, What are you going to do? After these guys are securely in custody, we're going to have words with the director. She wants you on this team for whatever reason, so I don't expect your probation will be broken, but there's going to be consequences. Fuck, Shadow Stalker said, and you're going to apologize to Kid Win. I don't ever want you assaulting him again. Shadow Stalker paused. Stop fucking testing me. I'm too tired for this. It wasn't Kid Win. Weld nodded. I blinked a few times in surprise. Tattletale hadn't gone into this, hadn't anticipated it. Weld had just tried to trip up Regent Shadow Stalker, and Regent had anticipated it. A bullet dodged. I saw we were passing by a front desk. I'd never been in the building, but I had passed by it a few times. It was surprisingly empty. There weren't many PRT uniforms around either. Who was it then? Weld asked. It took me a second to parse what he meant. Shadow Stalker groaned. Fuck off! It's me! Hey! He turned, putting one hand on her shoulder to stop her mid-stride. Who was it? She glanced at the group. Clock Blocker, Kid Win, Vista, and the girl from the Endbringer fight who called herself Flechette. Clock Blocker, she guessed. Weld didn't move an inch, and my gut told me Regent Shadow Stalker was off the mark. My heart sank. Clock Blocker and Kid Win stopped walking and looked our way curiously. Heads up, trap, Weld shouted. Arc 10, Parasite, Part 3. We burst into action the moment Weld called out his warning. Bitch drove her shoulder into the PRT uniform that held her back, then backed towards the front desk. Weld had already changed his hand into what looked like a baseball bat with 4 sides to it, long enough to reach from his wrist to the ground. Studs the size of golf balls ran down each of the 4 faces with a blunted spike on the end. Weld and Flechette were variables we hadn't planned for. It was unfortunate, but Weld in particular was also very well equipped for the task of keeping us from retreating back to the front door. Weld swung at Shadow Stalker, but his club passed through her. Fearless, she stepped close and punched the metal arrowhead of one of her crossbows into his right eye. He stepped back a few steps, one hand going to his eye, and she threw herself at him, bringing her knees to her chest and then kicking out. Her feet slammed into his chest and pushed him further back. Weld only staggered back a short distance, and it was Shadow Stalker who landed hard on her back. Kicking a 5'9" block of metal had to hurt, but Regent doesn't exactly have to be careful with Shadow Stalker's body. Bitch slipped past the pair of them, reaching the front door. I could hear her whistle at a volume that I doubted I could scream. Gru and Regent were already free of their cuffs, the 3 PRT uniforms closest to them lying down on the ground. Tattletale was grinning at the 4 wards at the end of the hall closest to the elevator. Kid Win, Clockblocker, Flechette, and Vista. The laughter didn't belong to Tattletale, however. It was cackling, sounding like someone having way too much fun. Flechette shouted, "They've got someone with the stranger classification." We did? The wards recovered fast enough. Vista was working to distort the ends of the hallway, the front doors, and the elevator at the end of the hall into impassable terrain. Flechette fired a shot at Gru, pinning him to the ground, quickly loaded and fired a second, rooting his feet to the ground. Flechette was loading for a third shot when a girl in black clothing with a horned demon mask and black scarf struck her weapon with a fire axe, splitting the metallic string and knocking it from her hand. The girl with the horns was on our side. Wait, I could almost remember her. Some relation to Gru. Then it slipped from my recollection, and I was distracted by the fact that Flechette was disarmed, her weapon broken. How had that happened? I couldn't afford to worry about it. I had to focus on contributing. I released the bugs from beneath my costume, drawing them out from beneath the panels of my armor and the compartment at my back where I kept my equipment and weapons. I'd known I wouldn't be able to bring many bugs, and that it would be difficult to get more on site with a clean, sturdily built structure like this one. I could gather a swarm, but it would be a few minutes before the bugs arrived en masse. I might have started sooner if I hadn't been so concerned about alerting someone and giving us away. The 970 bugs that poured forth were roughly equal numbers of bees, wasps, spiders, mosquitoes, and cockroaches. It was a smaller number than it sounded like, and their deployment was slower because of the way I had them arranged. Stingers and abdomens carefully kept out of contact with one another. I hadn't come without a plan. The bugs found their way to Vista, Flechette, and Kid Win, the only young heroes with exposed skin, at roughly the same time as they managed to get beneath the masks and protective clothing of the 2 PRT uniforms that were holding me. At first, the teenaged heroes swatted at themselves and backed away, as was usual. The funhouse mirror distortion at the exits stopped spreading as Vista's concentration broke, and Flechette dropped one of the small lengths of pointed metal that she'd been withdrawing from her belt. Then Kid Win cried out, his words raw and barely intelligible, because he was also screaming as he shouted them. It burns. Capsaicin was the chemical that made hot peppers burn your tongue. It was also the active ingredient in pepper spray. I'd used pepper spray a few times myself, and I'd had it accidentally used on me when I'd been out in costume, rather recently. At the time, I'd stepped in to help fight back a crew of the merchants up near the old boardwalk. They'd been aiming to loot the stores, and a contingent of people who'd created an armed force in the ruins of the upscale shopping district had stepped up to fight them off. One of the defenders had sprayed a looter, and caught me in the effect as well, maybe intentionally. I'd stepped back and let my bugs do the work while I recovered. After the fight had wrapped up and I'd headed back to a shelter in my civilian guise, I'd been left to consider the fact that my bugs were vulnerable to the pepper spray. By all rights, I should have been alerted to that fact the night I sprayed Velocity at the fundraiser, but I hadn't been able to keep that many bugs on him then, and I'd had many, many other distractions at the time. It had escaped my attention. While sitting up all night at the shelter, with kids crying and wailing and assholes making noise to intentionally piss off the other 100 people in the room, I'd had time to think. The next morning, I'd woken up, donned my costume, and started experimenting to see if I could protect my bugs somehow. Pepper spray was only one thing. I was bound, sooner or later, to go up against someone who used some kind of bug spray or gas on my tiny minions. Had I found a solution? Not so much. I had discovered that I could use hairspray to coat the abdomens and stingers of my bugs, and then dip said abdomens and stings into some of the capsaicin. With a bowl of each in liquid form and 2 single file lines of bugs, I could dose a fair number before I went out in costume. It did wind up killing some of the less durable ones eventually, either through the hairspray obstructing breathing or the capsaicin getting on the bug. But the end result was that I'd stumbled onto a weapon while trying to experiment with defenses. I had figured out how to use my bugs as a delivery mechanism, smearing pepper spray onto fresh stings and bites. I could jam their abdomens into people's noses, mouths, and eyes to cause intense burning and pain to the point that it made them nauseous. Flechette screamed, falling to her knees, her hands to her face. One of the PRT uniforms that was holding me let me go to stagger blindly toward the front desk. I struggled to get away from the other one, but he held me tight even as he bent over, threatening to topple to the ground with me beneath him. So yeah, it worked. Clock Blocker had been in the lead of the group as we'd all headed toward the elevator and had been delayed by the fallen PRT uniforms and his collapsing teammates. His costume covered his entire body, preventing the bugs from getting to him, so once he got past his allies, there wasn't much to get in his way. He charged straight for Gru, and Gru responded by shrouding his immediate vicinity in darkness, though he couldn't do much else. One of Flechette's bolts had nailed the sides of one of his boots to the ground. The other shot had missed, maybe because she couldn't see his foot and hadn't wanted to put a spike through his actual flesh. Clock Blocker closed the distance and plunged into the darkness after Gru. He emerged out the other side, and the darkness dissipated behind him, revealing Gru, frozen in time. Even the shadows smoldering around Gru's body faded, revealing his motorcycle leathers and the helmet with the skull face molded into it, which was bad. It could be up to 10 minutes until Gru was back in action, and we couldn't necessarily afford to babysit his body until he reanimated. The other PRT officer that was holding me broke away when a girl with a horned mask drove the wooden end of a fire axe into his shoulder. Regent made Clock Blocker stumble, and the horned girl shoved the PRT officer into the boy. They both fell in a heap. "Hey!" a girl shouted. I looked and saw a horned girl crouched by one of the fallen PRT officers holding the foam sprayer. Imp. Right, it was Imp. She looked at Tattletale. "It won't fire." Tattletale hurried over, grabbed the fallen officer's arm, and lifted it over to the handle of the gun. She put his finger on the trigger and aimed the gun at Clock Blocker, unloading spray on top of his upper body, just as he managed to heave the fallen officer off of himself. Flechette threw a dart into the foam canister, and both Imp and Tattletale backed away as foam began spilling out of the hole, rapidly expanding to partially cover the uniformed officer. After a moment's pause, she threw a spike of metal into every other canister on the other fallen guards. One even erupted into a pressurized spray, jetting up at an angle to hit the wall, creating a growing barrier a few feet in front of me, partially blocking me from reaching the rest of the combatants. Before Flechette could turn her darts on us, Regent reached out, causing her to fumble and drop it. A second later, he grunted and fell to all fours. Nothing I could see had touched him. A backfire? So easily? I was already turning to check when a primal scream tore its way from Shadowstalker's throat. She'd been fighting with Weld, and Weld almost fell over when he swung, and she didn't enter her shadow state. He couldn't stop all of his momentum, but he stepped close and let his upper arm hit her instead. They stumbled together, Shadowstalker continuing to scream like she was trying to empty her lungs of every last trace of oxygen. She raised her crossbow in my general direction, then moved, almost staggered, one step to the side. From her new vantage point, she targeted Regent. Her movements weren't fluid, and her shot flew past him. It hit Tattletale instead with a glancing blow, raking across her collarbone to penetrate her shoulder at a shallow angle. Tattletale was spun off balance and fell. Shadowstalker moved to load her crossbows, but her movements were jittery and jerky to an even greater extent than they had been a second ago. She stopped midway through the motion, her head turning as she looked from one hand to the other, and then looked up at Weld, who was in close proximity to her. "Ah, help!" she stuttered. A fraction of a second later, Regent was in control again, and Shadow Stalker was attempting to repeat her maneuver from earlier, driving an arrowhead into Weld's other eye, moving quickly and with as much grace as ever. He swatted her hand aside, and she entered her shadow state to avoid his follow-up swing with his club. A series of crashes and the sound of breaking glass showering onto tile announced the arrival of Bitch's dogs. They had barreled their way through the bulletproof glass that led into the lobby. Weld spun to face them, and Shadow Stalker abandoned her fight with him, using the opportunity to finish reloading her crossbows and fire one at Vista, who was hunkered down on the floor, my swarm all over her. At least the girl wouldn't be in further pain from what my bugs had done. I could inflict pain if it meant getting a job done properly. That didn't mean I liked doing it. "Shadow Stalker is conscious in there?" Weld shouted, his back to us, attention on the three advancing dogs. None of the dogs were as big as they could get. Bitch couldn't manage them if they were too large. But it was still the equivalent of three rather agile bears or three unnecessarily burly jungle cats joining the fight, each with some added natural protection in the horned growths of bone and calcified muscle. "Since a little while ago," Regent answered. That was disturbing. I didn't have a better way of putting it. I'd almost been paralyzed by Leviathan in the Endbringer attack, but even before that, the idea of being left conscious, but unable to move of my own volition, had always spooked me. I'd never had a relative in the hospital suffering from anything like that, and I couldn't remember seeing any movies or shows on television that might have put the idea in my head at an impressionable age. Still, it was one of the first places my mind went when I thought about worst-case scenarios and horrific fates. It had been in my thoughts more over the past 2 or 3 years, and the idea had been showcased in more than one nightmare over the past 2 weeks. Maybe it was more general than that. Not a fear of paralysis, specifically, but of helplessness. The dogs started fighting with Weld, and it didn't seem to be a fight they would win. They were faster, they had the advantages of numbers, I even suspected they were stronger. Despite that, when it came down to it, Weld was a walking, talking statue. They could hit him hard enough to knock him down, but they couldn't set their teeth into his flesh or deal any lasting damage. When Weld hit them, by contrast, the hits were most definitely felt. Still, their intervention did allow us to turn our focus to the others. Vista was out of action, as was Clockblocker. "Help Skitter," Tattletale ordered, sounding urgent as she turned her attention to the remaining wards that stood between us and the elevator. Who was she talking to? Then I felt hands at my back. I flinched, but they held firm. A second later, I felt my cuffs come undone. Imp, right. I was getting the distinct impression that it was easier to recall her and react as if she were present if I hadn't been actively trying to pay attention to her. It was almost as if actively trying to commit her presence to memory had the opposite effect. Except, how was I supposed to put that knowledge into practice if acting on that knowledge counted as recognizing her presence? I didn't get a chance to work it out, because Imp was gone from behind me a moment later, and we were faced with the issue of dealing with Flechette and Kid Win, and the fact that our movements were getting more and more limited by the growing piles of adhesive, nigh indestructible foam. Kid Win had pulled himself together enough to draw a small blue pistol from his waist. I tensed, bending my knees and shifting my weight to the balls of my feet so I could move the instant he aimed at me. He didn't fire it, though. Instead, he slapped his chest, and the armor there opened up, revealing a circular depression. He slammed the little blue gun there, where the weapon stuck like it was glued in, or maybe because of a magnet. The chest portion of his armor closed up. He staggered to his feet, swatted at his face, then looked like he immediately regretted doing that, judging by his pained grunt and gritted teeth. His costume started to light up, glowing with a silvery light where it had been gold before. 2 pear-shaped pieces of metal that had been attached to the armor on his shoulders raised into the air, floating. Abruptly, the pieces of metal jerked so the smaller ends pointed at us, and they each belched out blue sparks the size of softballs. Imp appeared as she ducked out of the way of one, while Regent avoided the other. Tattletale was still on the ground, one hand to her shoulder, and the shots passed well over her. I didn't see the need to dodge. The shots weren't fast-moving, and both seemed ready to collide with the walls on either side of me. What I didn't expect was for their trajectory to slow, then stop altogether before they hit the wall. Picking up speed, they headed back toward Kid Win. "Heads up!" I shouted. Imp and Regent turned just in time to avoid the boomeranging projectiles, but the distraction nearly cost them as the guns above Kid Win's shoulders blasted off another 2 sparks. "What the hell?" Imp shouted. The returning sparks had fallen into a lazy orbit around Kid Win. 2, then 4, then 6 sparks orbited him, with more joining the mass. As the 7th and 8th sparks joined the ring that spiraled around Kid Win, arcs and flashes of electricity began to dance between them, making it into a loose ring that encircled him. He advanced a few steps. My bugs were dying in droves with the residual electricity, but Kid Win, at least, was largely incapacitated, his eyes swollen nearly shut, with some bugs gathered over and around his eyes to further obscure his vision. I'd read up on the wards when I first got my powers. I knew they weren't allowed to use lethal weapons. Shadow Stalker had to use tranquilizer darts instead of real arrows, though she violated that rule often enough, and this device of Kid Win's, no matter how intimidating, wouldn't be allowed to do any sort of serious injury. "Shadow Stalker!" I shouted. "Charge Kid Win. Expendable assets." "Can't," she and Regent shouted in unison. "It'll disrupt my control." Hearing that, Kid Win turned and fired a pair of sparks in their general direction. The sparks flew further and faster, and they reached far enough that I actually had to dodge those. One slammed into the spray of foam that the canister was blasting into the wall, while the other sailed toward Shadow Stalker, but stopped a few feet short and then looped back toward Kid Win. That left one option. Bitch wasn't around, which left it to me. I whistled, hard, getting the attention of the dogs, when the dog with the squarish, almost snoutless head turned my way. He'd be the bulldog puppy, Bentley. I took a step toward Kid Win, pointed at the young hero, then shouted, "Get him!" A ragged, horn-encrusted tongue lolling out one side of his mouth, Bentley eagerly tromped past Weld, who lashed out with his club but only grazed Bentley's rear flank. Recklessly, the dog charged Kid Win, slamming into him, taking the full brunt of the ring of vibrantly blue electricity. The dog and the boy crashed to the ground together and skidded far enough toward the elevator that they collided with Flechette, who had retreated from the storm of blue sparks, her back to the elevator. Bentley stood, flashes of brilliant blue light crackling at the chain that was rigged around his muzzle. He limped strangely, but it wasn't due to any injury. From what I could tell, he'd stepped in some of the foam as he ran, and his foot was sticking to the floor. More foam had splashed his shoulder. In any event, the 2 teenage heroes were down, and it looked like the sparks had done more to incapacitate them than it had the puppy. "Good boy," I called out. "Good Bentley." His tail, shorter than any of the other dogs, wagged at the attention. Shadow Stalker, Imp, and the 2 remaining dogs had Weld on his heels, Imp doing her best to smack him in the face with the fire axe and have the metal obscure his vision. Bitch slipped past the melee. I looked away, tried to figure out a simple way to get by the spout of foam that was still sputtering out of the hole Flechette's dart had made in the tank, while still avoiding the flailing PRT uniform that was kneeling a short distance from me. The next thing I knew, I was being slammed into a wall, hard. For one moment, I thought it was Weld, but I heard the snarling of the dogs and the noise of impacts. I knew Weld would have hit me harder. No, it was Bitch. "You do not give orders to my dogs," she growled in my ear. "You do not get a say in whether they are good or bad. Do that again, and I will order them to chew you up and spit you out." "Bitch!" Tattletale shouted. I could almost see her out of the corner of my eye, cringing at the pain shouting caused her. She still had the crossbow bolt sticking out of her shoulder. "Not the time!" Bitch made a feral noise as she broke away from me, releasing me from my position against the wall. I turned around to see her grabbing the flailing soldier and throwing him on top of the foam canister that was still spraying in fizzing spurts. She walked on him to head toward the elevator. Reluctantly, I followed. Tattletale got Imp's help in dragging Vista to the elevator door. Regent took over and helped Imp hold Vista there, their fingers prying her eyes open until the retinal scan finished, then dragged her inside. "Come on," Tattletale urged us. I looked back at Gru. "Bitch, the dogs and Shadowstalker will be here to protect him," she called out. I considered a moment, then nodded. I joined the rest of the group in the elevator, and we headed down to the lowest floors. "Cameras," Tattletale spoke. I nodded and sent Bugs into the room, found the surveillance cameras that were spaced at regular intervals around the room, and covered the lenses with Bugs. We exited the elevator, stepping into the ward's headquarters. The room was vast, with a high domed ceiling that probably made this floor 3 stories deep. A computer console with a dozen monitors sat to our right, and the far end seemed to be walled off into several smaller rooms. The signs at the doors to the left implied they led off to the bathrooms. To think that, if things had gone a little differently, I might have wound up here. Tattletale was at the computer in an instant, reaching into her belt pockets to retrieve a series of USB thumb drives, which she slid into the available ports of the computer. The monitors went to a blue screen. As she typed, the word JPIGOT appeared on each monitor. When that word disappeared from the screen, she typed a password, a row of asterisks appearing on the screens, 12 or 13 characters long. Then gibberish filled the screen. Some looked like code, much looked like random numbers, letters and symbols, even hearts, spades, and smiley faces. Some of the snippets of code appeared to be file names. This should be every document the PRT has on file for their teams, barring the most secure documents, which wouldn't be kept accessible, even in this isolated network. She handed me a pad of gauze from her belt. "How long?" I asked. I snapped the feathered end off the crossbow bolt, then pushed it out the other side. The arrowhead wouldn't take to being pulled out backward. 2 minutes. But we may have to wait up to 10, depending on when Clockblocker's power wears off. While I talked, I held the gauze to her shoulder with one hand and took the offered tape with the other. There was a rip in her costume, and I opted to tear it a little wider and put the gauze beneath before taping it on to let the skin-tight fabric hold it firm. "Bad luck he got one of us. Yeah." Tattletale made a face. "Regent, let us know if there's movement from Gru up there, through Shadowstalker. We're going to have to fight our way through their reinforcements if we wait too long," Regent said. "Probably, but not the Protectorate. The only one who could get here fast enough to matter would be Velocity, and he's dead." "They could have new members like the wards did," I said. Tattletale frowned. "True, they recruited those guys fast, especially since they've been here a few days." "Either way, we should make a quick exit," I advised. "Fast as we can manage anyways, with Gru being stuck like he is." As the screen filled with more gibberish, reaching the point where there was more white text than blue background, we prepared to make our exit. "Elevators down." "Of course it is," Tattletale sighed. "There are stairs through the door by the little window where the tourists look in," Tattletale said. She waited with one hand poised over the USB drive. A half second before the last blue dot on the screen disappeared, the entire room plunged into darkness. The computer screens went black. Silence reigned for a few heartbeats. It wasn't Gru's power, though. I could hear my own breathing. "Someone cut the power?" Imp asked. "No," I heard Tattletale. "Separate power source, buried deeper beneath the building. Same with the computers. There's nothing upstairs or even in the city that could turn them off. They're hooked up to that power source, they've got internal batteries, and the only external connection is by satellite link-up. They might terminate our connection to the computer database via the satellite feed, but not the lights." "So this is bad?" Imp asked. A computer-generated face appeared on the computer screens, illuminating us and our immediate surroundings with the pale glow the image cast. I didn't recognize the face, but I could guess. Dragon. She was onto us. Yeah, that was pretty bad as these things went. Arc 10, Parasite, Part 4. I could detect a definite note of irritation in Dragon's voice, despite how she'd synthesized it to mask her tone, inflection, and speech patterns. "You were tampering with my system," she accused us. In the dim light the monitors shed, I could see Imp trying the door by the stairs. It didn't open. I gave it a try and verified it had sealed shut. I wasn't entirely sure why I'd expected a different result. Maybe I'd been hoping Imp had been making a horribly timed joke. It wouldn't be beyond her. "We were, but we're done now, so we'll be on our way," Tattletale called out, her voice raised to be picked up by whatever microphones Dragon was using to listen in on us. I could see her pulling the USB drives from the computer. Dragon informed us. "I'm reading the files and notes we have on you as we speak. Tattletale, it seems you have a penchant for needling your opponents. Rest assured, if you intend to try it, I won't rise to the bait." Imp hefted her fire axe and struck just beside the handle of the door. The door itself was hollow, but it was made of something like fiberglass, and the axe only made a small hole, a half-inch across and less than 2 inches long. She struck again, slightly higher. "So few think they will," Tattletale said with a grin. "So, I guess you've locked us in here, huh?" "Yes, you'll get out perhaps, but not before reinforcements arrive." "We'll see," Tattletale answered. She began moving toward the ward's quarters. She looked from one security camera to the next, as if trying to figure out if she was being watched. I did have my bugs covering the lenses of the cameras I'd been able to find, but that wasn't to say that they could have something more concealed. It was kind of creepy that the kids here were observed constantly like that. "You tried to steal official data, and you put a virus on my system. Apeo's work, I believe. I'm more insulted by the fact that you went to that hack than I am about the virus." "Had to slow you guys down somehow," Tattletale called out. She motioned to me, and I hurried toward her. Imp let go of the axe to rub and shake her hand. Regent grabbed the weapon to take over the job of hacking at the door. I followed Tattletale into one of the rooms at the other end of the ward's headquarters. Pieces of technology littered the area. There was a small bed in one corner, so littered with pieces of junk, screws, scraps of metal, and unfinished projects that I doubted the occupant had used it to sleep in a long time. Kid Wynn's room. Had to be. "Gear up," Tattletale said. "What?" "Taking a tinker's stuff to keep is a bad idea, what with GPS signals and tracking and all that, but at the very least, we can use this to get out." She swept her arm over the room, where stuff lay on every surface. Dragon's voice echoed through the chamber. "I can hear you, Tattletale. Do not use a tinker's devices. Power supplies can overload, weapons and equipment can misfire. Only the tinker who made it can verify the devices as safe and operate them properly." "Right, sure," Tattletale called out with a note of sarcasm in her voice, "because it's not like there's any high-profile mercenaries out there who've made a career off of using a tinker's stuff." Dragon didn't reply. Had Tattletale found a sore spot? I knew the Dragon Slayers were mercenaries who had taken the parts of one of Dragon's armored suits to outfit themselves as high-tech mercenaries. Tattletale looked up and glanced around the room, then whispered to me, "Don't worry about misfires. I think my power will help us spot those." I wanted to believe her, but she'd been wrong before. It would be Murphy's Law for her power to go awry here, with us blowing our faces off or something. Still, I didn't stop her from picking up a gun without a handle. She pointed it at the wall and pulled the trigger that sort of dangled beneath the gun. A yellow dot appeared on the wall, then started smoking. She glanced over her shoulder, and when I turned to see what she was looking at, I saw a matching dot on the wall. She moved the gun, and the dots both moved. "Laser with invisible beam. Ricochets," she murmured. "Doesn't burn that hot, wouldn't do any damage to anything or anyone, wouldn't incapacitate our opposition or get us out of here." She put it aside. "Look for something better." Dangers aside, borrowing Kid Wynn's stuff wasn't a bad idea. At the speed Regent and Imp were cutting through the door handle, I figured it would be minutes before they were through. We had to get out of here before the Protectorate arrived. Even with their numbers cut by recent casualties and injuries, that would be very, very bad for us. I uncovered 3 guns that looked like they might work. Tattletale looked them over. Non-lethal flamethrower that probably didn't pass review, some kind of force field barrier cannon, and some kind of gun for fighting bigger foes. Nothing too dangerous, but don't point them at any of the rest of us until you've tested them out. Nodding, I lifted the one that was 5 feet long, needle thin, and spear like. I worked to get it out of Kidwin's quarters and aimed it at the largest chair, by the computers. I depressed the trigger, and a blue flame the length of my forearm spat out the end, consuming the chair. The seat bent under the heat, melted plastic pooling on the floor, an acrid smell assaulting my nostrils. The flames that licked the remaining material cast some extra light on our surroundings. It was pretty thorough destruction for less than 2 seconds of sustained fire. How the hell is that non-lethal? I hurried over to the door, and both Imp and Regent backed away to let me fire. I pulled the trigger, nothing. He took the power and fuel supply from that to use for something else, put crap components in there instead. Let it recharge, Tattletale shouted across the room. Almost 1 minute before you can shoot again. Fuck, Dragon would have overheard that, but she didn't comment. Instead, a sprinkler system kicked into gear, misting down from the ceiling. Though the quantity of water was low, the effect on the burning chair was immediate, and the flames disappeared with surprising quickness. What little of the moisture soaked into my mask tasted faintly bitter. Then Dragon shut off the monitors, plunging us into absolute darkness. I left the weapon with Imp and hurried over to the other guns, using the few bugs I had with me to feel my way, sensing their locations and identifying anything I might trip over. The second gun, though it had looked more complete than any of the others, had 2 triggers on the front and 2 by the handle. I tried various combinations and got nowhere. The last gun was heavy. I hefted it with both hands, then told Regent and Imp to move aside as I aimed it at the door. Didn't want to waste any first shots if this was going to take forever to recharge as well. The gun vibrated, rattled, and shuddered for a full 5 seconds before it fired. The shot didn't cast any light, but it struck the door with enough force that the entire door buckled outward. I hit the door with my shoulder, and the upper hinge came free. There was a light in the stairwell, shedding some meager light on us. "Tattletale!" I called out. "We got through." By the time Tattletale reached us, Regent and I had brought the door down. The lock was still extending from the handle to the frame, but we'd taken the door off its hinges, and we were free to pull the door open from the other side. We hurried into the stairwell and began heading back upstairs. "Fight upstairs is going south. We need to step in fast," Regent spoke. I felt out with my bugs to get a sense of where each of the combatants were, then nodded a hasty agreement. I began taking the stairs 2 at a time, though the gun I carried had to weigh a good 30 or 40 pounds. We were halfway up when we came across a pair of unconscious PRT officers. I looked at Tattletale. "Imp did this," she told Regent and me. "She went ahead, remember?" It took me a few seconds to realize who she meant. Damn it, having to keep track of Imp and having her power throwing me off my stride was getting to be annoying. The team prior to now had a kind of synergy, with the way my bugs and Tattletale's power let us deal with Gru's darkness, and how the dogs could smell opponents through it. We found Imp at the top of the stairs, aiming the spear-like gun. The blue flame poured out, melting a large hole in the fiberglass. We crouched in the stairwell as Imp opened the door. I was so distracted by the sight of the PRT uniforms waiting for us in the hallway that I didn't see where Imp went. The reaction wasn't as strong or immediate as I would have expected, given the burst of flame and the door opening. A side effect of Imp being the one to carry it out? One person shouted and alerted the others. Regent used his power on the one closest to him, causing him to stumble sideways into his comrades. Their ranks descended into chaos. I readied the few bugs I had on my person, then hefted my borrowed gun. I backed down a stair as I asked Tattletale, "This thing is non-lethal, right?" She didn't have an answer for me. Instead, she yelped out, "Back!" She practically pushed me down the stairs, and I caught a glimpse of her covering her ears, shutting her eyes. Despite the fact that I was on the verge of landing face first on the landing of the stairwell, I didn't use my hands to stop myself. I turned to take the impact with my shoulder, tucked my chin to my chest, and covered my ears. Regent jumped out of my way as I landed, his arms pressed against the sides of his head. It had to have been a grenade. The blast ripped through the upstairs hallway and left me gasping even from inside the stairwell. Tattletale was up before I was, hauling me to my feet and up the stairs. Regent followed just behind us. The grenade had been of the non-lethal variety, but not quite a flashbang. The gathered soldiers were reeling, stunned, and Imp was crouched by the only one who was still conscious. She drew a taser from her sleeve, tagged him, then stood. She had one of the PRT's grenade launchers slung over one shoulder, the flamethrower thing in one hand and the taser in the other. She handed off the grenade launcher to Regent, then put the taser away, holding the flamethrower. To reach the hallway where Gru and the elevator were, we had to head out past the gift shop and around the front desk. Everyone we'd left behind was still there, friend and foe, but things hadn't gone well in our absence. We found Bitch and Shadowstalker backed against the elevator at the far end of the hallway. The three dogs were spread out between them and Weld, limp and unmoving. They'd shrunk down almost to their normal size. I had to watch for a few seconds before I could see the rise and fall of Sirius' chest and verify he was alive. Weld stood beside Gru, binding a length of cord around our leader. The way he was positioned, Bitch wasn't able to get by, and I could only assume that Regent had Shadowstalker there because Bitch lacked the means to defend herself solo. The elevator, naturally, wasn't running. I lifted the heavy gun, then aimed it at Weld and Gru. "Where did you get those guns?" Weld asked, squaring his shoulders as he turned to face us. "Borrowed 'em." Tattletale smirked. Then she fired the gun she was carrying. An arc of electricity crackled between the nozzle of her gun and Weld. Seemingly unconcerned, he started running towards us, metal feet pounding on the tile. Tattletale backed up one step, and I took that as my cue to back up 3. This guy could hit hard, and none of us was capable of going toe-to-toe with him. There was no need to worry, as the lightning gun's effects added up and Weld collapsed to the ground before he got halfway to us. Tattletale stopped firing, and I could see that the metal of Weld's body was glowing with the heat he'd absorbed. She stepped closer and swung her gun at him, smacking him across the face with the barrel. It stuck, and she swiftly backed up. I wouldn't have thought he was that hot, that the metal would bond. Weld staggered to his feet and tore the gun away with both hands, leaving a melted mess that extended from his cheekbone to his forehead on one side of his face. Gun removed, he started reforming his hands into sticks, 4 feet long, with the ends curved into blunted hooks. I raised the gun that had nearly knocked the door off its hinges and pulled the trigger, aiming it at both Weld and Gru. Nothing. Whether it was due to a lack of charge, a malfunction, or whatever, it just didn't work. Weld began to charge us, and he was nearly to us when Imp stepped in his way and tried to fire. "Don't!" Tattletale started. As with my gun, the flamethrower didn't work. Weld clobbered her just as she was beginning to utter a swear word, catching her with both hands to fling her aside. She tumbled into a sign. That put him only a few paces from me. Shadowstalker was already running toward us. She entered her shadow state to leap forward, interjecting herself between us and him before going solid. There was no grace in her movement as she threw herself at him, no particular technique she employed. They slammed into one another, and she went limp, her body getting tangled up in his legs as he trampled her to the ground. A short distance from us, Regent fell to one knee, grunting slightly. A backfire? Or something else? More out of an attempt to minimize the damage to Shadowstalker than actually being bowled over, Weld fell. I did as Tattletale had done before and struck Weld with the metal of my gun's barrel. As I'd hoped, he was still hot enough that the gun bonded to the metal of his body. I could help to hamper his movements. Rather than hit him in the face, I struck him across one arm, so the gun made contact with both his forearm, where the hook hand started, and his bicep. My hope was that it would limit his range of movement. Tattletale, Weld and I hurried to back away as he began to climb to his feet, Tattletale recovering her lightning gun. I could see her debate striking him again, but she seemed to decide it would be better to keep her distance and hold on to it. I could see Shadowstalker materialize behind Weld, with Bitch approaching from the other end of the hallway. One of the dogs, the setter whose name I couldn't quite remember, had climbed to her feet to join Bitch. Gru was still out of action. Weld started laughing, the noise just a little off, coming from someone who I suspected didn't even have to breathe. Tattletale caught some meaning in his laughter a second before Regent did. Tattletale, Regent, and Shadow Stalker all simultaneously turned toward the front of the building. Regent and his puppet uttered a whispered, "Oh shit," in unison. The floodwater and moisture were stirred into a whirlwind flurry around the metal frame by turbines and jets, pushing water and debris a distance away as it set down. As the engines turned off, the water slopped back into place, lapping around four metal legs. It was squat, the frame low to the ground, with a snake-like head and a segmented sinus body. It had four legs and a long tail that trailed on the ground in a zigzagging shape, segmented much as the body had been. It would have been intimidating enough on its own, but the four engines that were mounted on its upper body, extending out of each of its shoulders in two places, were some combination of a weapons array and a propulsion system. They bristled with turrets and missiles. It opened its mouth briefly to vent off some vapor, and I could see more weapons contained within. Foremost among them was some kind of massive cannon. That explained why Dragon had been so quiet. When she'd talked about reinforcements, Dragon had been talking about herself. "Okay," Tattletale spoke as she backed up, moving her gun to point it at Weld, then Dragon, and then back to Weld again. "Good news. That's a model Dragon designed for speed, meant to get places fast. Like, say, if she wanted to get an armored suit from Toronto to Brockton Bay to personally take a hand in dealing with a group of teenage villains. It's not really that serious a combat model." I looked at the weapons that bristled from Dragon's shoulders. If I didn't know Tattletale's power, I wasn't sure I'd believe her. "Well, that's good," Regent replied. "Except it can still totally kick our asses." Tattletale didn't disagree. "Best tinker in the world? Probably." I glanced behind us, where Weld was standing with excruciating slowness. He was already cooling off. The dog by Bitch's side was growling now. Tattletale continued. "The bad news is that the protectorate is about a minute away. Gru's still out of action, and there's pretty much no chance we're going to get out of here before then." Arc 10, Parasite, Part 5. The four engines mounted on the shoulders of Dragon's armor shifted position, each aiming at a different point within the lobby. Tattletale was the first of us to turn and run, the rest of us moving to follow as Dragon opened fire. All in all, Dragon unloaded four streams of containment foam into the lobby, each of the shoulder-mounted turrets gushing like fire hoses. Only flecks of the spray struck us, but they expanded into blobs of foam the size of golf balls and softballs. Each blob was tacky, sticky, and any attempt to wipe it away just smeared it and exposed more surface area to the air, making it expand more. If we'd started running a fraction of a second later, we might have been screwed. Weld moved to block our retreat, but Shadow Stalker stepped up to fight him with one of the dogs, Bentley, joining her. It made for a pretty effective combination, as Weld couldn't swing hard enough to hurt the dog without risking hurting his teammate. The way Regent was having Shadow Stalker fight, there was no self-preservation or defense, which worked out to being a more effective combat style than anything else, in its own way. I was pretty sure Weld had never fought someone who was actively trying to get hit. I'd been drawing my bugs closer to the building since we arrived, and I brought them into the fray as Dragon continued to lock down the lobby with the spray. The first tactic I tried was blocking the spray with the bugs. I didn't intend to stop the spray, exactly, but I hoped that I could cause the bugs to catch it and drop down atop Dragon, sticking to her. It didn't work. The spray was too strong, and the bugs were blasted much too far away. Only one or two landed on her, and even then, I doubted the positions were that ideal. Instead, I adjusted my tactics. The idea was the same, but I didn't want to sacrifice bugs for the purpose of clogging her systems or blocking her guns if it would be that ineffective. I gathered some bugs on anything that looked like a sensor, glass panes, or openings in the armored vehicle, and I set the rest to gathering on the shattered glass that littered the floor of the lobby. The feet of the insects and arachnids had setae, or small hairs, which branched further into setules. These fibers, in turn, harnessed van der Waals forces to cling even to surfaces as slick as glass. I'd been reading up. I didn't use this grip to stick to the surface, but instead employed it to collectively lift and pick up the glass. 6 or 7 bugs could lift a decent-sized piece of glass if they were on the ground, while anywhere from 12 to 30 could fly with one if I managed it right. I had a few hundred to employ, with more still arriving. With this glass, I did my best to catch and block the outlying flecks and drips of spray as it flew through the air at the periphery of the streams. The spray knocked some pieces of glass from the air and struck some bugs, causing the group to lose their collective grip and drop the glass. That was to be expected. Others, though, caught the foam on one of the flat panes of the glass. As more bugs rose with the glass between them, I organized them into loose walls and barriers to maximize the area they were catching and to overlap so that less bugs were exposed to incoming spray. "She's got a disadvantage," Tattletale spoke, her voice low. "This suit is meant to fly to serious crises at a moment's notice, deal with dangerous foes. She's packing too many lethal weapons." "That's a disadvantage?" Regent asked. "She's not about to kill us. Bad PR, especially for a notable hero traveling into another country to fight virtual unknowns like us. So we only have to worry about her non-lethal weaponry, and she doesn't have many." I nodded acknowledgement, but my focus was elsewhere. As I judged that enough bugs had caught the foam on one pane of their individual pieces of glass, I directed them to carry the glass down to Dragon. As I positioned the bugs, the glass stuck to lenses, vents of hot air, vents where air was rushing in, and the smaller joints near segmented areas. Dragon didn't seem to notice or care. "Can she see me?" Imp asked. Tattletale started to speak, but stopped when one of the streams changed direction to spray closer to us, forcing us to retreat in a hurry. I glanced at the gift shop. Would it be a good idea to retreat in there? The walls were glass, which was both good and bad in that both Dragon and our group could break through it. The problem was that we risked being trapped if we headed in there. "No way she got here this fast," Tattletale spoke. "She's based in British Columbia, on the other side of the continent. This has to be remotely controlled, like the one she used to fight Leviathan, which means the only eyes on you are digital. And—" "She's not," Regent interrupted. "What?" Tattletale asked him. "There's someone in there. I tried using my power on her, experimenting, and I felt some kind of nervous system. Too much material between me and it for me to do anything with it, and I wouldn't really try it while I'm controlling Shadowstalker anyways. I'd probably backfire." Shadowstalker was still fighting Weld. As Dragon turned a stream toward them, Weld reacted fast enough that I suspected he had some line of communication to her. He backed out of the way, and Shadowstalker and the dog both moved in the other direction, with a stream splashing where they had been brawling a second before, blossoming into a pile of foam as tall as they were, separating the two groups of combatants. Most of my first wave of bugs had either been shot out of the sky by errant bits of spray or had placed their initial pieces of glass and were going back for more. This wasn't a KO hit, and Dragon was too good to let something this minor stop her. However, it might delay or hamper her. The real issue was that this was too slow, and we were on a tight time limit. Less than a minute, and the Protectorate would arrive. Their team was smaller, with recent deaths and Armsmaster's retirement, and I hadn't heard about any new recruits. Then again, I hadn't heard about the ward's new recruits, and here Weld was, being annoyingly persistent. I was assuming he was the new leader, given his tone with Shadowstalker. I wondered if being ridiculously tenacious was a job requirement for being in charge of the wards. It made sense to have a commander who wouldn't be removed from the field by an errant attack. You wanted someone who would stay in the thick of it for the whole fight. The gift shop jutted out from the wall of the lobby some, the glass panes arranged to showcase more of the pictures, action figures, and memorabilia with 3 broad windows than they might with one. This layout gave us some cover from Dragon's attacks. Even when the force of the spray served to break the windows, the expansion of the foam at the edges of the frame soon blocked the worst of it off. If anything, it was closing the windows off. Only the pane of glass facing us was left unbroken and largely free of foam. Sensing this, Dragon started to advance further into the lobby. Her broad mechanical feet began hissing with vapor, and the goo my ground-born bugs were hauling towards her began to run, losing its consistency and stickiness. She set one foot down directly on a pile of foam and lifted it up again with no difficulty. It was clear. The foam wouldn't hamper her. So she's piloting that thing then? Imp asked. My power works on her? We can't be sure, Tattletale spoke. Don't risk it. Dragon advanced another step, circling our relative cover from the window to spray inches closer to us. The way it was piling up, there would be no way to go over it, and the route we had available for going around the far end of it was rapidly closing. We were getting hemmed in, our backs to the wall by the window. Imp, Tattletale shouted. No! I looked at her, confused, but I didn't have time to figure it out. A flare of orange light caught my attention. Dragon's mouth had opened wide, and she was spewing something like an ignited accelerant into the lobby. With this fluid, she drew a 3-foot wide line of flame onto the lobby floor, stretching from just below her to the stairwell door by the front desk. She'd cut off our escape route. Weld leaped into and through the flame, his hook hands swinging wildly. Some of the accelerant had landed on him, making him burn, but he didn't seem to mind. He turned 90 degrees and lunged forward in response to something I couldn't see or hear, then swept his hooks out in a frenzied series of blind attacks. On the third swing, I saw Imp duck beneath the attack, then stumble back out of his reach towards us. The fucking fuck, she shouted. Dragon can see you, you twit, and she's relaying directions to Weld. Tattletale shouted at our new member. And what the hell were you hoping to accomplish over there? I could have figured something out, Imp pouted. Tattletale didn't have a response to that. Instead, she hauled her gun up and then fired a short burst at Weld. He backed up into the wall of flame, oddly enough, and Tattletale stopped firing. 2 of Dragon's shoulder turrets were now being set to the task of controlling the flame and keeping it from spreading across the lobby, to the front desk, or up to the ceiling. Twin jets of chemical spray kept the fire limited to the areas Dragon wanted it. Doesn't she care about property damage? I asked. She prefers to keep her data secure and pay out of her own pocket for any damage. Betting this place is slated for some major renovations anyways, given the state of things, Tattletale explained. The foam was inching closer to us as Dragon prowled further into the lobby. More of my bugs set sticky pieces of glass down on top of lenses and sensors. That was apparently enough for Dragon, because she stopped spraying the foam altogether and started using the 2 turrets that weren't dedicated to fire management to deploying the same vapor that shrouded her legs. It surrounded her, and the work I'd done to stick things to her began to come apart as the foam turned runny. A wave of darkness swept over her. Gru was awake and had formed a loose group with Shadowstalker and the dogs. All but one of the dogs were normal-sized, now, with no sign or trace of their mutations. They still faced the hurdle of passing by Weld, but a blast of darkness and an abrupt change of direction faked out the young hero, letting Gru slip by. Dragon's here, he shouted aghast. Yeah, but we got the stuff, had to wait for you. Go through the gift shop, we'll meet you outside. He charged right behind the spot where Dragon was still within the cloud of darkness, and out the front door. Shadowstalker simply passed through Weld and bolted for the door, running faster than the ward's leader could, while the smallest dog stayed just out of his reach, bolting after Gru. Bentley, the only dog currently under the effects of Bitch's power, a little beaten and battered, came running towards us, far, far too eager for something that large and strong. Bitch grabbed his collar before he could leap up to greet her, redirected his momentum, then wrenched him toward the window. Go, she shouted, pointing. Bentley eagerly plowed through the remaining display window, knocking over DVD racks as he landed in the shop. We followed him in. The shop had everything Cape-related, from movies showcasing individual members of the teams to books, magazines, figurines, toys, and posters. The layout of the shop made it awkward as a battlefield. The shelves, racks, stands, and display cases forced visitors into a winding path as they navigated the shop. The window looking out on the street was smaller than the display windows and was covered by metal bars. Tattletale began unloading the lightning cannon on the bars. Dragon lunged out of the darkness, then spotted us, her shoulder turrets orienting in our direction. We ducked behind a heavy wooden magazine stand filled with Cape magazines and tourism pamphlets as Dragon opened fire with 2 streams of containment foam. Tattletale maintained the electrical assault on the bars, even as she joined us in taking cover with her back to the magazine stand. The gun she was holding began to whine, with a pitch so high I could barely hear it. Bentley reacted, though, turning his head one way and then the other. It made Bitch's job of holding his collar and ensuring he stayed behind cover twice as difficult. The bolts holding the bars to the window frame melted before the bars themselves did. One side swung free, then the entire assembly dropped down on top of a bookshelf. The entire room shuddered as Dragon forced her way through the display window. One gigantic metal talon slammed down on the bookshelf, annihilating most of our cover, and we scrambled to find shelter behind the remaining stands. Her back legs began working their way towards us, the front of her body staying stationary. This made her back arch, and her head and shoulder-mounted turrets gradually shifted to point downward. It would be seconds before she was spraying the foam down from directly above us. The whine of Tattletale's gun reached a crescendo, and a blindingly bright arc of electricity flew from the side of the barrel to skip along the floor. I worried it would ignite something, but it winked out before it could. Tattletale lunged for the shelf next to the magazines, grabbing a head and torso model of Miss Militia. She jammed it in between the trigger and the trigger guard of her gun, forcing the trigger into a depressed position. Then she lobbed the setup over the back of the shattered bookshelf. The lightning licked the wall and the ceiling before the gun crashed to the floor. Dragon lurched back to get away from it. "Go!" Tattletale shouted, setting her feet below her, then leaping between the twin streams of foam that Dragon turned toward us. She came only an inch shy of making contact with the heap of foam that Dragon had created. Dragon heaved herself over and beyond the electrical surge the gun was still pumping out, chasing Tattletale, swiping with one mechanical claw. I got the sense she was pulling her punches to avoid murdering my teammate, because the attack was slow. Tattletale slipped past, stepping onto the bookshelf to clear the window. Or maybe it had something to do with the bugs I had gathered on her sensors. With Tattletale's escape, Bitch, Imp, Regent, and I were left in the gift shop. Dragon's lunge for Tattletale had put her directly in our path to the window, and an uneven pile of containment foam surrounded her, in the middle of the room. Regent and Imp made a break for it. Imp ducked around to the left, coming within a hair of being caught by the spray Dragon turned her way, then used the cover of the bookshelves to stay out of the line of fire as she ran for the window. Dragon half turned away from the rest of us in pursuit. Regent moved as if he were going to try to move beneath Dragon, using the distraction Imp had provided, clearly intending to step on her metal foot. He changed his mind when a crackle of visible electricity flashed down the mechanical limb. He turned a hard right, picking up a piece of bookshelf, and used the wood to block the majority of the spray as he passed beneath one of the stray streams. From there, much as Imp had, he had a clear route. Dragon moved to bar more of the window with the bulk of her body, her back arching. Her upper body and head now pointed almost down at an angle, the streams from her shoulders reorienting to block off the escape routes available to Bitch, her dog, and me. So I did something risky and borderline stupid. I lunged forward and stepped onto the metal foot of Dragon's armored suit, like Regent had been planning to do until he discovered it was electrified. I had known the same spider silk I'd used for my costume was insulated against electrical charges, had even put that into practice in my fight against Armsmaster during the fundraiser. This was something altogether different. I could feel the faint tendrils of electricity snake over the surface of my body, though I only stepped on the metal foot once. I couldn't tell if the source of the electricity was the gun Tattletale had rigged and thrown. Dragon's tail was close enough to it for the electricity to flow to her, or if it was from Dragon's body itself. Though the footing was unsteady, I was careful not to touch the metal leg with my upper body, and even turned my head away, risking throwing myself off balance, so my hair wouldn't make contact with it. As I understood it, The biggest danger the electricity posed was that my body would become part of a circuit. If the circuit included vital organs, I'd be a goner. And that kind of closed circuit could happen if the electricity could run from my hand and through my heart on the way to my foot. The gamble and assumption I was working with was that electricity followed the path of least resistance. Insulated costume versus vapor in the air, it would travel through the vapor. Insulated costume versus metal leg, it would travel down the leg. Either way, I was glad when I didn't burn my foot or have it get fried or go numb. I was damn glad I didn't die. With all of this consuming my attention, I was caught off guard when something large brushed against me while I was mid-leap. The impact threw my airborne momentum off, drove me to one side. My first, most immediate thought before I even considered the source of the attack was where I was about to land. It was reflexive, but I sent a spray of bugs out from the armor near my glove, scattering them onto the area just in front of me. Before I had even figured out what my bugs were sensing, I reacted to their signals. I slammed my arm out, rigid, my hands splayed, and felt a jarring pain as I tried to absorb my entire body weight with one arm and force myself away. I felt a lack of traction as my hand made contact with something soft and squishy. My maneuver was too minor to make a real difference, but I managed to buy myself a precious few inches. My hand, arm, and shoulder were caught in the containment foam. I tried to raise myself to see Dragon looming above, but the foam offered only a rubbery resistance. It had set with the contact, bonded to my costume. I was pinned face down on the ground. What I did see, as I raised my head as high as I was able, Bitch was astride Bentley, who'd grown large enough to ride, and they were standing near the window leading into the street. I could only see her eyes behind the plastic of her mask, and everything else was communicated through her bearing, her posture, the angle of her head. I'd seen something similar when I'd first met her. It hadn't been Dragon that knocked me into the foam. Dragon turned her upper body to strike at Bitch. As she moved, her back leg was close enough that some of the vapor was getting on me, slowly liquefying the foam. It was too slow to matter. Dragon had me. Her stainless steel jaws snapped for Bentley, but the dog was already slipping out the window. Bitch had dismounted and was running to one side, heading off in a different direction to exit at the far end of the window, which left me in the gift shop with Dragon. I have a sworn responsibility to protect that data, she said as she turned her attention to me. She sounded surprisingly normal. Her voice was clearly digitized, but it was still too human to match the massive metal frame. Can't help you there. One of my teammates has it. Where are they taking it? I stayed silent. Your teammates left you behind. I've read the file on what happened after the Endbringer attack. Hard feelings. Something like that. If they aren't going to be loyal to you, why protect them? Because someone else was depending on it. But I wasn't going to say that out loud. The whine of the lightning gun increased by an octave. I saw Dragon's upper body shift in reaction. Move the insects away from my suit now, Dragon ordered me. Why would I? Now, she ordered, and there was an urgency in her tone that banished any suspicion on my part that there was a ruse or that somehow it might serve my interest to disobey. I withdrew my bugs, but I kept them poised to return if needed. Dragon moved back, and her body coiled around the spot where the gun had fallen, segments meeting to loosely interconnect with one another, forming a dome-shaped encasement. 2 shoulder turrets began dispensing foam directly downward into the dome. Count yourself fortunate, Skitter. I've never killed a criminal without explicit permission and all the filed paperwork, and I'm not about to start with you. I'll be in contact. What? I had to raise my voice to be heard over the high-pitched whine. I couldn't figure out what she meant. Think about what I said. Take a close look at those priorities of yours. The vapor had melted enough foam that I could pull myself free and stand. I got 5 paces away before the whine ceased. A second later, lightning began to spill from the gun in overtime. Dragon's body served to block the vast majority of it, but a few arcs slipped through the cracks in her body. The full meaning of her words struck me the moment the gun detonated. A large portion of her suit was destroyed, as was one of the limbs. Dragon fell to one side. She'd saved me? Regent had said Dragon was inside, piloting it, hadn't he? I stepped closer, trying to see if she was okay. Regent was right. There was something in the suit of armor. It looked like a fetus. The features were crude, barely humanoid in any sense of the word. The eyes were half-formed, and it had no nose, only a beak-like mouth. The head was half again as large as the body below the neck. Wires wove in and out of orifices. It turned to look at me, then made a low mewling sound. The metal around it began to glow red-hot, then white-hot. Burns consumed the thing, and the flesh changed to a charred black texture as the metal of the frame began to melt and dissolve. Whatever had happened with the Dragon Slayers, it seemed Dragon was dedicated to eliminating all traces of her work when her suits were damaged. But was that Dragon? No. She'd seemed to know she was sacrificing her suit, but she'd also said she was going to get in contact with me in the future. I backed away, then ran for the window. So what the hell had I just seen? Had that been someone who was physically affected by their powers? I wasn't even sure if it was human. I had a growing, uneasy feeling that this wasn't related to powers and trigger events in the conventional sense. I pushed it out of my mind. I had something more pressing to focus on. I set my foot on the bookcase, then stepped up and through the window to exit the building. I could see the others dispatching 2 members of the Protectorate. Tattletale hurried towards me, said something about the explosion, that she thought I'd be out by now. I barely registered it. My attention was on one person as I strode forward. Bitch. Arc 10, Parasite, Part 6. The residual foam on my glove made my hands sticky as I reached into the compartment at my back and grabbed my baton. It took me 2 tries to get my thumb onto the button so I could whip it out to its full length. I strode towards Bitch, weapon in hand. Tattletale hurried to catch up to me, turning to keep an uneasy eye on the ongoing fight with the Protectorate. "Hey, Skitter!" Tattletale grabbed my shoulder. I whirled to face her, hand clenching my baton. I could see the change in her expression as some piece fell in place for her. "Shit," she swore. "Hey, listen." She didn't get a chance to finish. White smoke billowed around us. My first thought was that our adversaries were using some sort of bug spray. The way today was going, it would be just my luck. I held my breath and hurried out of the cloud, Tattletale following, and searched for the source. Assault was taking on Regent and Imp, while Gru and Shadow Stalker were dealing with Battery and Weld. Bitch and her dogs, on the other hand, were facing down Triumph. Not the matchup I would have chosen, taking on the guy with the sonic shout, using dogs with sensitive hearing. I almost went after Bitch right then and there, but self-preservation won out over any desire for retribution. As Tattletale and I made our way around the cloud, I spotted Miss Militia. A black-green energy crackled in her hand, and she lobbed a grenade my way. I scrambled back, only for it to turn out to be another canister of smoke, billowing out between Miss Militia and me. Why the smoke? The bees I had in the smoke were acting funny. I was surprised to find out why. I'd known that beekeepers use smoke to pacify the bees before collecting the honey. My assumption had been that it acted as a tranquilizer, putting them to sleep. In reality, it was forcing them to revert to instinctual behavior. It made them want to eat and feed and to flee. For those near enclosed spaces, or even the corners of walls or the foundations of buildings, it made them adjust their wing beats to divert the flows of oxygen. If she'd been intending to use the smoke to screw with my insects, she'd underestimated my power. I canceled out the instincts and sent the bugs through the smoke, blind, feeling out for her. I found her running towards us through the smoke. "She's coming," I shouted. In retrospect, that was a mistake. Much as I might have warned Tattletale and the others, I'd also informed Miss Militia on my location. I turned to run, but she was already raising her gun to fire with an ear-shattering crack. From the way it cut past my bugs and the wake of disturbed air the pellets left behind them, I could only guess she'd just grazed me with a shotgun. I collapsed sideways to the ground, and the pain came a heartbeat later, radiating over half of my upper body, from my shoulder to my right butt cheek. I was guessing it was non-lethal ammunition. It could well have been lethal, for the sheer degree of hurt it delivered, if my costume had prevented it from penetrating. Before she could shoot again, I directed my bugs to her hands and eyes, hoping to incapacitate her. I still had a small few of the capsaicin-loaded bugs and sent them all her way. As hard as it was to see in the smoke, there was still faint light. That light disappeared the instant Gru used his power. Miss Militia was staggering and reeling as her hands and face lit up with stings and burns. The gun wasn't in her hands anymore, which meant we weren't at risk of getting shot. I sent more bugs across to the other members of the Protectorate to try to disable them. Tattletale fumbled around and found me in the darkness, clasped her hand around the same hand I held the baton with, and helped me to my feet. She gave me her support as we limped away. Nothing seemed to be broken, judging by what I felt. The darkness disappeared after we'd traveled across the street. Gru greeted us. "Dragon?" "Kaput, thanks to Tattletale," I spoke. He looked back the way we'd come. "Damn that smoke. Listen, Tattletale, head down this street. Wait for us. Skitter and I are going back in to find and retrieve the others." I suppose that would be another benefit of using the smoke. If you didn't expect to be able to see, then it didn't hurt to deny your enemy that same privilege. Miss Militia had been thinking about this. If her team wasn't so sparse on members, she could have done a lot more damage. "My bugs are telling me they're over there, and there." I pointed in the direction of our teammates. "That's all I can do for you. I kind of got shot, not sure I'm up to running around." His head snapped around to face me. "Shot? I'm okay. It was non-lethal. I think," I assured him. "Go." He did, glancing over his shoulder to look at me before disappearing back into the midst of the darkness. Tattletale and I made our escape. We got 3 blocks away before we found a spot to hide. Tattletale got out her phone and began sending messages, presumably to Gru and Coil. Our hiding place was the lobby of an apartment building. Boards had been placed over the windows, and there were signs that some people had camped out here not long ago. It was otherwise similar to Gru's apartment complex. Less tidy, obviously. "You okay?" Tattletale asked me. That question seems to come up a lot. "I'm sorry. I knew the gun would inevitably overheat, and what little I could read off of Dragon told me she'd deal with that above anything else. I didn't think you'd be stuck there too." "No, your gun thing there saved my skin. The real problem was..." I trailed off. I still had the baton in my hand. The residual containment foam meant I'd probably have to peel the glove away from the weapon. I clenched the weapon tight. We sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes before the rest arrived as a massed group. Shadow Stalker was limping, and 2 of the dogs were their normal size, draped across Bentley's back, but everyone was more or less intact. Bitch's eyes widened fractionally as she saw me. I was already standing, barely feeling the hurt from where I'd been grazed. Blood pounded in my ears, and I could feel the buzz of my insects. "How?" she started. I didn't let her finish. My baton held in both hands. I struck her in the upper thigh. When she didn't fall, I let go of the baton and backhanded her. She toppled, and protests and shouts echoed around me. It hurt. Damn it, I'd never really hit someone with my hands before. I wondered if I'd managed to break something. There were still bugs on some of my teammates. I could sense them approaching, Gru and Imp moving to stop me. I ducked out of the way of their hands before they could grab me, and then held up my baton, menacing them. I cast a momentary glance towards Shadow Stalker, then augmented my voice with the buzzing and chirping of my swarm. "Don't." "What the hell are you doing?" Gru roared. "Ask her." My response was barely above a growl. Gru glanced down at Bitch, who was rubbing her chin, opening her jaw wide, as if testing it. I dropped down to a crouch so quickly that my knee slammed into the ground. I grabbed the upper end of the baton and pulled it over Bitch's head, forcing the bar between her teeth, pulling back hard. Gru moved to stop me once more, and I shook my head. He hesitated, then stopped. Bentley was pacing towards me, snarling at the attack on his owner. I met his gaze with my own, unflinching, and he didn't lunge to attack, maybe because he didn't want to hurt his master in the process. I didn't break eye contact with the dog as I spoke with the swarm buzzing in accompaniment. "Regent, this isn't for Shadow Stalker's ears." "Got it," Regent spoke. Shadow Stalker moved to the bench by the elevators, sat down, and buried her face in her arms, covering her ears. Regent informed me, "She can't hear much of anything now." Bitch, I pulled on the bar, eliciting more struggling from bitch. Just tried to fuck me over in the fight with Dragon. Shoved me into the foam. Bitch made a muffled noise, then jabbed me in the side, where I'd been grazed by Miss Militia's shotgun. It hurt, and in the interest of keeping her from doing it again, I shifted my position so I could force bitch onto her back against the ground, her head pinned down by my baton. She could still hit me and jab me, but my shins could take a lot more abuse than her jaw could. I belatedly realized I'd taken my eyes off Bentley, but he didn't maul me. When I looked up, I saw Tattletale had a grip on his chains. "You're a coward, Rachel," I spoke. "You just did the very same thing you hate me for almost doing. You stabbed me in the back. You fucked over your own teammate." She mumbled something around the bar. The look in her eyes made me seriously worry she would kill me when I let her go. "I'm in a position to hurt you now, and I'm pissed enough to do it," I spoke, my voice low. "But I won't. This vendetta against me ends now. You got your shot at me. You fucked it up. If you're still mad at me, you fucking better cope. Got it?" She snarled out two muffled words. I suspected they were rude. When I spoke next, I bent low and whispered the words for her and her alone. "When you're tossing and turning and trying to sleep, remembering what I did and said here, and getting pissed off about it, remember that you were the weak one. You embarrassed yourself, fucked up. You were the weakling, the wuss, who couldn't even confront me face to face. And knowing you like I do, I'm betting it's going to gnaw at you. That's as much a punishment as I could inflict, I think. That's on you, not me. You said it yourself a while back. It's a mistake to underestimate me. You want another shot at it. It had better be really damn good. Because if it isn't, I'm going to survive. I'm going to get away. And then I might break your jaw for real. For starters." I stood, removing the baton from her mouth and stepping away to give her room to stand. Leaning against the wall, I pressed the button and collapsed the baton into the handle. I stared at her. Working her jaw, she stood and glared at me. She either didn't have a response for me, or she did, and her jaw hurt too much for her to try giving it. None of the others were jumping into the middle of this. In the face of the silence, I offered one final comment. "I think I've already covered what happens if you want to continue this vendetta. Now I'm going to offer you a deal. Number 3, I think, and my deals with you are usually pretty fair if I may say so myself." Her eyes narrowed. "I fucked up. You fucked up. Whatever. Insult for insult. Blow for blow. I'd like to think we're even. So now I'm going to trust you to have my back. I'm going to put myself in more situations where you have a prime chance at fucking me over, backstabbing me, catching me at my most vulnerable, because we can't function as a team any other way. I'm going to treat you like a damned teammate, Rachel, but I'll go one step further. You think you can put this behind you and satisfy yourself with what you tried to pull earlier tonight? Cool. Because if you're willing, I'll come with you to help take care of your dogs. I'll bring fucking lunch if you want it. That's the deal I'm offering you, pissed as I am right now. I'll be your damn friend." She looked away, down at the ground, scowling. Take it or leave it. She decided to leave it, apparently. Bitch stomped away, slamming the door the moment Bentley passed through it, leaving the rest of us standing there in the rubbish-strewn apartment building. Gru sighed audibly and looked over our group. "We'd better go. We should decide what we're going to do with Shadow Stalker now." "We could keep her," Imp spoke. Regent shook his head. "Nope. There are drawbacks to this, and one of them is that I lose control of anyone I'm controlling while I sleep. Better to get rid of her on my terms than have her trying to shoot me in the throat while I take a nap." "And it's kind of fucked up," I spoke. "I thought you were all in," Regent said. "I am, but that doesn't mean I'm an idiot," I retorted. "This kind of mind control." "Body control," Regent interrupted, his tone bored. "Her mind still belongs to her." "Semantics. This kind of mind control is pretty high up there on the scale of fucked upness. People are going to respond to that. It might be the nudge they need to start responding to us with lethal force. Think of how different tonight would have played out if Dragon and Miss Militia hadn't held back." "Sure," he shrugged. "Whatever. I don't know why you're arguing with me. I agree. We should get rid of her." "What did you do, back in the old days?" Tattletale asked. "Kept 3 people I used regularly with my sister's help. But this is fine. Look, watch. Shadowstalker stood, lowering her hands and arms from around her head, and walked over to the door. She faced Regent. I'm letting you go, he spoke. And then he did. She dropped to all fours on the ground, grunting. A second later, she was loading her bolt, spinning to point her crossbow at him. She stopped before firing. There's a catch, he spoke. My power, once I've figured someone out, it's a lot easier to control them after. Anytime you come near me, I can do this. I can use my power and retake control in the blink of an eye. He had her raise her crossbow and pointed at her temple. It was a tranquilizer dart, but the meaning seemed pretty damn clear. Next time I get control, I'm keeping you for a full day, maybe two if I feel like pulling an all-nighter. And here's the funny part. There was no humor in his voice. I'm going to do it even if I'm in civilian clothes, if my power tells me you're in range. You won't even know when it's coming. You're now a liability to the wards, and you won't ever know when or where I'm going to get control again. Unless you leave. Skip town. Join another team. She nodded slowly. The movement was jerky, which was peculiar. Was he giving her limited control of her own movements? Now let's walk you off to the other end of the city before I release you. I don't think you're quite stupid enough to try and follow us, but I think my teammates would be more comfortable if they were sure. Shadowstalker turned and walked through the door. Regent looked at us, shrugged. Good enough? She might be mad enough to come after someone else in our group. But yeah, good, Gru said. Let's go deliver the stuff. We didn't meet Coil in the underground base, and the people surrounding him weren't all the same uniformed mercenaries that had made up his entourage in our prior meetings. The meeting place was at the south end of the docks, near the border to the downtown area, and it was closer in appearance to the refurbished, ramshackle building where I'd reunited with the Undersiders than anything else. The building was an old quadruplex, and it had been reinforced with metal panels, sandbags, and plastic sheeting to keep the interior crisp and dry, much as the other building had. Small rooms with bunk beds filled half of the lower level, with a bathroom, kitchen, and living room taking up the rest. Finding the lower level empty, we headed to the second floor and found an open space supported by two metal pillars. There were a half-dozen mercenaries with Coil, as well as a collection of people who looked like they had come from every walk of life. Teenagers, professionals, and two guys that might have been capes, one thin, short guy with brown skin and a tattoo around his mouth, depicting a mess of sharp teeth penetrating the skin of his cheeks and lips. The other was burlier, shirtless, and wore a rusty, old-fashioned-looking mechanical rigging around his hands, with a bear-trap jaw plate. The frame seemed set up to hold metal claws around his fingertips, while allowing his hands the full range of motion. He had a spiked collar of much the same style. Coil sat in a black leather armchair, with a laptop set on the table beside him. Dinah was there too. She sat at the base of the chair, on a cushion just beside Coil's feet, picking at the threads of her white dress with a dazed single-mindedness that told me she had probably received her candy pretty recently. Undersiders. Tattletale informed me you were successful, despite complications. May I see it? Tattletale stepped forward and handed Coil the USB thumbstick. He plugged it into the laptop, then turned the computer so the middle-aged man to his left could type away. Data's corrupted, sir. Looks like the download was interrupted at the 97% mark. Can you fill in the blanks? Coil asked him. Probably. Will take some time. There's encryption. Good encryption. Maybe a few days with the full team working on it. Most likely it is Dragon's work, Coil spoke. Let's assume it'll take a week minimum. Perhaps Tattletale will be able to assist. Yes, sir. Priority number 1, I want the data on the Slaughterhouse 9. I felt a chill but didn't say anything. Was he intending to hire them? It would be a huge mistake in my book if he was. Regent asked the question for me. The Slaughterhouse 9? At least some of their members have been seen in town, preying on the locals, disrupting recovery efforts. The recent chaos makes the city a playground for them, Coil spoke. One of my teams is bound to run up against them soon. How likely is it? Tattletale asked. She tilted her head in Dinah's direction. Can you ask her? I suppose. Coyle put his hand on Dinah's head, stroked her hair, then slid his hand down the side of her face until he could place his fingertips under her chin, raise her head to look at him. Pet? It was disturbingly intimate in a way I'd rather not think about. No, not intimate. That was the wrong word for the impression I was getting. Possessive. I looked away. Yes? Dinah asked. Likelihood that one of my groups encounters the Slaughterhouse Nine? Who? He moved to take the laptop, and the middle-aged man stepped back to let him. He typed for a few seconds, then turned it around so Dinah could see. It was a gallery of images. Bonesaw, he spoke. The girl on the screen looked barely older than Dinah, maybe the same age as Aisha. The image showed her wide-eyed. A spray of dried blood painted her face at a diagonal. Shatterbird, a dark-haired, brown-skinned woman with a helmet covering the upper half of her face in a beak shape. I was reminded of Iron Falcon, the boy I'd tried to help who died in the Endbringer attack. From what I'd read, Shatterbird usually used her power as the Nine arrived in a city to maximize panic and terror. I suppose they were flying under the radar for now. Fuck, I'd have to do something about my costume, just in case. Crawler. No portrait this time. It was a still from a surveillance camera, a misshapen silhouette, not even humanoid, in a shadowy area. I'd come across stories about him when I'd been researching possible superhero names for myself. Not pretty. Mannequin. Another long-distance shot. The figure was standing by Bonesaw in the photograph, with other hulking figures within the shadows of the background. He stood almost twice her height, and he looked artificial. His body was in pieces, each section wrapped in a hard shell of ceramic or plastic or white-painted metal. I couldn't be sure. His joints were a mix of loose chains and ball joints, a tinker with a body modification fetish. I couldn't say how much of the transformation was his own power and how much was Bonesaw's work. The Siberian, a woman, naked from head to toe, her body painted in alternating stripes of jet black and snow white. She had gone up against the triumvirate, Legend, Alexandria, and Eidolon on a dozen occasions, and she was still around to talk about it. Or around, at least. From what I'd read, she didn't talk. Burn scar. Younger, maybe an older teenager or a young-looking 20-something. She looked almost normal, with her dark hair badly cut, but then I saw the vertical row of cigarette burns marking each of her cheeks, and a faint glow to her eyes. Hatchet face. This was one I hadn't even heard of. The man didn't wear a mask, and his head was shaved. He looked like he had been beaten, burned, and just plain abused so often that his face was as much scar tissue than flesh. And he didn't look like he'd been handsome to begin with. Jack Slash. Jack looked like someone on the attractive side of average, his dark hair cut short and styled with gel. His beard and mustache were immaculately trimmed so that each had a serrated edge, and his shirt was wrinkled, only half buttoned so his hairless upper chest showed. He had kind of a Johnny Depp look to him, though he had more of a widow's peak, a longer face and lighter eyes. Good looking, if you looked past the fact that he was a mass murderer. He held a small kitchen knife in the photo. There were parahumans who were fucked up before powers entered the picture, like bitch, and there were parahumans who became monsters after they got their powers, like Bakuda. Then there were the really dangerous ones, the people who had probably been monsters before powers were even on the table, and then they got worse. And if that wasn't bad enough, you had Bonesaw, who was like some kind of artist, as psychopaths went, the sort of person that drew other lunatics to her, just because they wanted to see what she would do next. Even that wouldn't normally work as a dynamic, but as I understood it, Jack somehow managed to play them off one another and keep the group more or less intact. He was familiar enough with the psychology of his group and just plain charismatic enough to keep them from killing one another. Which wasn't to say they didn't. There were only 8 members in their group at present, and the turnover rate was pretty damn high because they had a tendency towards recklessness, infighting, and showy displays. They thought nothing of descending on an elementary school just because they could. When the heroes came for them, they came with lethal force. Dinah said. What is it, Pet? Coyle murmured. It's him. Who? She pointed at the screen at Jack Slash. Him. You're going to have to explain it to us, Pet. What about him? He's the one who makes everyone die. I shivered. What? Everyone here? Dinah shook her head, her hair flying out to either side. Everyone, I don't understand, can't explain. Try, he urged her. Sometimes it's in 2 years, sometimes it's in 8, sometimes in between. But if he's alive, something happens, and everyone on Earth starts to die. Not that everyone doesn't die anyways, but they die really fast when that something happens, all one after another, and in a year, almost everyone is dead. So I said everyone, if that makes sense, and a few live, but they die pretty soon after anyways, and… Shh, pet, I think we understand what you're saying. Quiet now, unless you think of something important. We need to consider this. Silence reigned for a few long seconds. You could have heard a pin drop. His power isn't all that, I don't think. Gru spoke slowly, as if considering the words as he spoke. Space warping effect, so any blades he's holding have an edge that extends a horrendously long distance, all with the optimal force behind the swing. Swings his knife, cuts through an entire crowd. Doesn't make sense that he'd be able to murder everyone on Earth. Unless he somehow cuts the planet in half, Tattletale mused. That was disquieting. No, Dinah spoke. He doesn't. I think we need more numbers if we're to understand this, pet. What is the likelihood that he succeeds in this, to 1 decimal point? 83.4%. You said if he's alive, what if we killed him? Now, to 1 decimal point, if I use my power. 31.2% chance someone kills him before he leaves the city if you use your power. It doesn't happen until 15 years from now, if you do. So it still happens? Coyle asked. Yes, always happens. Tattletale spoke up. He's the catalyst for something else then. Is it always successful, pet? This something that kills everyone on Earth? She shook her head. Not always, not all the way. Sometimes more people live, sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands, sometimes billions. But millions or billions always die when it happens. If I were to send the travelers, how likely would they be to kill him? My head hurts. Please, pet, this is important, to 1 decimal point. 22.6%, 30.9% chance some of them die. And the undersiders? 11.9% chance they succeed. 55.4% chance they die if they fight those people. Coyle sighed, then straightened. He looked at the middle-aged man, handed him the computer. I strongly recommend you get what information you can on the group. Any detail in the PRT records could be invaluable. Lose sleep if you have to. The man took the laptop, swallowed, and then offered a quick bob of his head. The others in the assembled group around Coyle looked just as alarmed by what they'd overheard. We should contact the local heroes, Gru spoke. Let them know what's up. Coyle nodded, slowly. I'll look into it. That said, I think the numbers illustrate one thing. You are not equipped to fight that group. If you encounter them, you. 60%, Dinah muttered. 60%, pet. 60% chance the undersiders encounter some of those people. Coyle turned to look at us. So you're likely to encounter them. When that happens, you run, cede any territory, abandon any job. I would rather you were alive than successful in a job. Got it, Gru spoke. In the meantime, we move on to the next phase of my plan. Coyle spoke. You may be wondering about this location, how it is similar to the new headquarters I provided you. I have outfitted these areas to be your stations, points from which you will operate, work to seize and keep territory. I have several more. If you're amenable, I would have each of you take one of these stations for yourself. Gru, this would be your station, shared with Imp, which I assume is all right? Gru looked around. Big place and a lot of beds for 2 people. More on that later. Rest assured, I can provide staff, help. I expect you'll wish to find and recruit people of your own. Contact me about funds. I will ensure that anyone you hire is paid well. Gru nodded. Regent, your territory is near Gru's, close to the water. Regent nodded. Bitch is absent? Interpersonal stuff, Gru replied. She'll be back. A shame. Your other headquarters, where I moved your collective belongings, that will be her station. Barker and Biter here showed up for the Endbringer fight, and I got in contact with them. They, alongside these 3 young individuals, he gestured to the 2 parahumans, and 3 college-aged kids who looked rather intimidated, will work under her. Barker and Biter profess to be fearless and should have little difficulty managing the dogs, even when Bitch's abilities are at work. The men and the young lady I've provided have some degree of training in veterinary medicine or handling dogs. Let her know this. She is free to accept them or refuse them as she sees fit. Gru looked over the 5 people who would be Bitch's henchmen, nodded. Tattletale, I've set up quarters near Lord Street in one of the ABB's old locations. I assume your teammates will want to be in contact, and this area is both accessible and it can reach any other area readily. The area is already furnished with computers, and you'll find staff there, people who are capable at gathering information, be it from media, computers, or the streets. You'll also find a small force of mercenaries that I've assigned to you, so you can act on that information where you see fit. Cool. Skitter, I have set up quarters near the south end of the boardwalk. Reconstruction and repair work is still ongoing there, but if you will be patient, it may well be one of the more lucrative locations when things are up and running again. I nodded. That wouldn't be far from my old home, close to our old hideout. Did that mean something? Did he know who I was, or had Tattletale suggested it? I felt uneasy about that. Regent, Gru, Imp, and Skitter, I realize I have not detailed any employees to you to begin with. I leave it to you to start this task for yourself, to decide what you need and how you intend to operate. Once you have decided this for yourselves, let me know, and I will endeavor to help you fill in the blanks in your individual operations. As you leave, you'll receive emails on the locations of your individual headquarters. For the time being, all I require from you for now is that you establish order and assume some measure of control over your territories. There were nods all around. Your payment for tonight's job will be in your accounts shortly, with a bonus for the obstacles you faced. Any questions? Any topics you would like to raise for discussion? A few questions, but I figure I'll see what's up with this new role we're taking, Gru replied. Then I'll ask them. Good. I've got something I'd like to talk to you about, I spoke, augmenting my voice with the swarm's noises to mask it. In private. Yes, that's fine. I was hoping to have a private conversation with you anyways. Anyone? Anything else before we part ways? Nobody had anything further to say. Gru and the others turned to leave, and the crowd around Coyle followed them soon after. One of Bitch's henchmen, Barker was it, leered at me as he passed, dug his hand into his groin in some sort of scratch or a lewd gesture. Lovely. He'd get along great with Bitch. When the group had left the room, I could hear noises downstairs as they moved about the house. Or maybe it was Gru checking his new place. I was left alone with Coyle and Dinah. I wasn't sure I liked that our group was being split up like this. The timing seemed bad. I'd sort of been hoping I could repair the divide, and that would be hard if we were each in our own territories, doing our own things. I'd crossed that bridge when I came to it. I heard about the incident at the hospital following the Endbringer attack. I nodded. Tattletale told me that you know I was fully informed about your true nature. Yeah. Did she explain how? I shook my head. She'd told me about his power and confidence. Well, I suppose I may share that detail at some point in the future. You understand my desire to keep certain things private? Yeah, no, I get it. It makes sense. It's smart. He murmured. He turned to his pet, stroked her head like one might with a dog or a cat. She stared down at her dress, picked at a thread that was sticking out, stretching it out long. The thread snapped, and she let it drift from her hand to the ground. Then she started picking at another. Coyle interrupted my observations. So, you wish to discuss something? Yeah, I've made a decision. Do tell. Before, back in the limousine, you asked me what I wanted of all this, what I desired from my deal with you. Yes. I asked you to fix the city. You told me you planned on doing that anyways, that I should ask for something else. And you've decided. Yeah, I took a deep breath. Dinah, your pet. You want me to release her? I'm afraid. I hurried to cut him off. No. He stopped, tilted his head slightly. I swallowed, felt an ugly feeling in my gut. I know she's invaluable to you. I know how useful her talent is and the lengths you went to in getting a hold of them. I don't like it, but I get it. He didn't respond. He just stared at me, his mask lacking eye holes, just black cloth stretched over eye sockets. All I'm asking is that you let her go when you've done it. When you take this city, when you succeed in your plan, you release her to go home to her family. If you do that, I'll work for you. I'll try harder than anyone to get this city under your control, and then I'll work for you for as long as you'll have me afterward. I'm afraid, Skitter, that this deal doesn't quite balance out. I intend no offense, but my initial impression is that my pet is far more valuable to me than you are. No, my heart sank. But I can accept it, he spoke, provided you prove to me that your talents are worth losing hers. I admit, the active assistance you can provide might prove more useful when the city is firmly in my grasp, when I have less to be concerned about in terms of day-to-day operations. I nodded, numbly. Anything else? I shook my head, then turned to leave, wordlessly. When I went downstairs, Tattletale and Regent were already gone. Maybe they were checking out their new places. Gru and Imp were in the living room, opening crates of stuff to see the supplies they had available. I wasn't up to talking to them or explaining the recent conversation. Leaving the building without a word, I sloshed through the water. I realized my fists were clenched and my glove was sticking to itself, thanks to the residual containment foam. Annoying, I wondered if I could scrub it off. When I peeled my fingers away from the glove, I realized my hand was shaking. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves. I could do this. Whatever I had to do, I was going to help that girl.